Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jay, and today we have this Sony ZV-E10 Mark II. Now, this is the beginner's guide. So first off, congratulations on your new camera. I'm going to break this sucker down. I'm going to show you how to set it up, taking it out of the box, how everything works, putting the battery in, memory cards, all sorts of stuff like that. Then we're going to turn the camera on and go through all the different features that this camera offers. It's an incredibly powerful camera, and it's going to take time to go through all the features. So I'm going to start off like really beginner oriented, and then like I said, as the video progresses, we'll get into the more advanced modes. In addition, I will set the camera up in the lab scene behind me so I can show you like live demonstration how these features work like in a real world, simulation type environment. And that seems to work really well to show you guys how different things work, like shutter speed, aperture, depth of field, all sorts of things like that. Let's just get right into it, guys, shall we? When you open the box, this is what you should get. Now, I would recommend getting it with the kit lens. It's only $100 if you get it with the kit lens. Obviously, if you have other lenses that are better than the kit lens, you don't need it, but this is what it looks like with the kit lens. Now, I do apologize. I misplaced my lens cap for this, but the lens cap looks pretty much like that, and you just pinch it to take the lens cap off, just in case you've never seen one of these before. All right, so it comes with a camera strap here. You can weave this through the camera strap holders, and then this way you have something to, you can hang the camera around your neck or whatever. They make all sorts of different kind of camera straps. They got wrist straps, neck straps, shoulder straps. I do highly recommend putting some kind of strap on the camera, because if you're just holding it in your hand, you bump into something, it is pretty easy for it to like fall out of your hand, If you have a strap though, it's not gonna go anywhere. Just food for thought there. But anyways, we have the charging cord here, we have the battery, we have the microphone diffuser here, which goes right into the hot shoe on the top, and then of course we have the lens. All right, so the first thing I want to do is get the battery in here and get it charging so you can use your camera. So let's just flip it over here, and we're looking at the bottom, and then we can slide this over, and that will pop the door open. Then we can take the battery, and you can see how the battery has an arrow. It goes like this. You can just slide this in like so. And notice the little blue lever there? That's what's holding the battery locked in. If we push on the blue lever, it will pop, and then the battery will spring up automatically. And it has this little rubber flap here on the battery door that you could peel back, and that's for like a dummy battery cord. The battery is in, and there we go. Now we're going to need to charge this. So looking at the sides here, we have the headphone jack and we have the HDMI jack. So this is a mini HDMI, so you can plug this into a TV or a monitor or whatever. Now you have the memory card slot right here. Just close that for a second. And then up here you have the microphone and the USB-C charging port. So basically what you would need to do is just plug this cable, the USB-C side. That's the USB-C. You would plug that into the camera charging port right there. The other end you would plug into a charger, like your cell phone charger or something, because this does not come with an actual wall charger. All right, so I got here my PD power source. So it's just a USB-C cable plugged into the wall outlet. So I'm just going to plug it in here and show you what it looks like when it's charging. So you can see that orange lights up there. Now when the battery is fully charged, that orange light will go out. Now, while I'm over here, let me just show you the memory card. So this is the memory card I've been using lately. I recommend something like this. We have a Pro grade. Now SanDisk also makes great cards. I'll have them both linked below. I recommend getting whatever's on sale currently. Now this is a 128 gigabyte, which is pretty large. You might want to get the 256 though, depending on how much video footage you plan on recording, because this does get chewed up pretty quick. In the standard 4K mode, 24p, 100 megabits per second, you can get about 2 hours on this card. So if you're recording in the more advanced modes, you'll get way less time. So keep that in mind. Now, the way this goes in is like this. So if you're holding it this way, it goes in like so, and you just push it in there. And there you go, it just clicks into place. Now we can close the door. I'm just gonna leave this plugged in because it needs a little bit of a charge anyways. So looking at the top of the camera, guys, we have the hot shoe right here. That's what this is. So you can put flash units, you can put microphones. Sony makes a couple awesome electronic microphones you can put on here. You can also put other microphones like this Sennheiser MKE400. Now this is not like an active hot shoe, this is just a cold shoe, but it will still slide in there to hold the mic, and then you can use this cord to plug into the actual mic port, and you can have a really high quality mic on top of your camera. Now here is the 3 capsule mic, which is really awesome because you can set it to automatic, or you can set it to forward facing, rear facing, or just all around. Now here, this little icon, this is the sensor location. So if you ever need to measure for a minimum focus distance or something like that to the actual sensor, this is where you would measure from, that line. That's like the focal plane of the sensor itself. Now right here is a little tally light. You could see right there, that will blink and stuff doing various tasks, and when you're recording video, it'll light up to let you know you're recording. You can disable it if you don't like that light lighting up as well. Now over here you have the mode switch, so you have photo mode, video mode, and S&Q mode, which stands for slow and quick motion. So that will actually record slow motion video and quick motion video right to the memory card, so you won't have to process it after the fact. That's what slow and quick motion is for. A couple other things you have here, just like a control dial, like so. You have the background defocus and clear button here, which is awesome and works while you're recording. Turn the background blur on here. There we go. Let's really separate the subject much better now. Now again, record button here. You have the on and off toggle switch, which is new from the original ZV-E10. And you have a zoom lever here, which is very nice, especially when using a power zoom lens like this. And then you have a shutter button, which is a 2-stage button. So if you press it, by default, it'll focus. If you press it all the way, it will then take the photo. And it'll focus when you're recording video. If you press the shutter button, it'll like reacquire focus, kind of just like in photo mode. Now looking at the back here, we have the swivel LCD screen. So this can open up and swivel around. And you can close it like this, so you can have it with the screen out, or you can have it in the armor mode, which is what I prefer to keep it in when stowing the camera, so this way the screen doesn't get scratched. Highly recommend you do the same thing. Now, looking at the back, we have a nice little thumb rest here, which I like, with a slightly beefier grip due to the larger FZ100 battery. Now, we have the menu button here. We have the function button. We have a control dial that spins. So this dial spins around, and it's also a 4-way controller. So when you're navigating in the menu, you have up, down, left, right, and then the center button is like the enter button. So guys, when you see me navigating through the menu when not using the touchscreen, this is what I'm using. I'm just using the toggle up, down, left, right, and the center button is enter. Now you have a garbage can, which is also the product showcase button, and we have the playback button here, which will bring you into the playback menu if you want to check out your photos and videos, you know, while on using the camera and stuff like that. Now this dial also acts as other buttons, so I'll show you this once the camera's on, but I just want to quickly go over it. The display button on the top will cycle the screen through the different display modes. This button over here is by default the ISO button, or the ISO button. That's the sensor sensitivity. Now down below here we have the exposure comp button, so that will lower or raise your exposure if you want to, so you can compensate the exposure using that button. And then over here is the drive modes if you hit the button this way. So that's where self-timer will be, continuous shooting for like rapid fire photos for sports and stuff. Also in addition, bracketing and stuff like that is in the drive mode area. So just one other thing I wanted to show you here on the bottom is the 1/4 screw mount here for tripod plates and stuff like that. So I have tripod plate right here. This actually came with this awesome tripod that I will show you in a second. And that basically just screws onto there, and then this plate will quickly attach to the top of a tripod. That's what the tripod plates are for. Now let me just mount this lens up really quick. So basically you got a camera cap here, and it's got a little notch there. That notch tells you where to line it up. So you can see right here, the notch lines up with the white dot. So you line the notch up, and then you can put the body cap on. The lens works the same way. That is the sensor. Now these are the lens contact points. Now this is the actual E-mount flange. And now again, remember this lens release button? You can see how that steel pin there is actually going up and down. That's what locks the lens on. That's why this is the release pin. So let me show you how you mount the lens. So the lens just has a cap on the back of it. You just take that off by twisting it. And then you just got to look for the white dot on the lens. And you can see right here is the white dot. You see that little circular dot? It's kind of hard to see on this particular lens, but there it is right there. So we just need to line that up with the white dot on the lens flange, and then you twist and listen for the lock. There it is. That click you just heard is this lens pin. So notice how I can't take the lens off now. It's locked on. If you press this button, it will now untwist and you can take it off. That's how that works, like so. Now this is a power zoom lens, so it has a power zoom toggle on the side here that you can use to zoom the lens if you want. All right guys, so what we're gonna do now is turn the camera on for the first time. I'm gonna walk you through the initial setup process. It's only gonna take a minute or two, and then we'll get into how to use the camera and stuff, which is a little bit more fun. But the setup part is important. You're gonna have to do it. So here we go. Now, first thing you're gonna need to do is select your language. Now, I speak English, obviously, so I'm gonna select English. Now, so there's a couple of options that it's going to force you to walk through here. This is great for people that are visually impaired, for example, because it's prompting you with this right now. So you can set accessibility functions for screen reader. So that basically will mean the camera will read the screen to you. So again, this doesn't apply to me, but if you are visually impaired and things like that, you might want to set this up right now. I'm going to click Not Now for me. Privacy notice, I'm just going to click OK, I understand. What this is talking about, by the way, is the fact that you can register faces on the camera. So it's just letting you know that you're like saving biometric data to the camera. So it's like a warning. Now, this is the Creators app. Now, I have a separate video for setting up the Creators app using, I believe I used my A7 IV for that tutorial. So for now, I'm just going to skip this. So I'm just going to hit the garbage can and say set on camera. So I'm going to hit the garbage can. Now we're going to need to do is enter the date and time. So I'm going to go in there. Now I live in New York, so I'm going to click this one. And then I'm going to click that as well. And then I'm just going to set the date. So June 22nd. And it is 9 in the morning, 9:28. And then I'm just going to hit the OK button here. Highly recommend setting this now, guys. This is just going to allow the camera to get a little bit warmer before it shuts off, in case you're in warmer environments and stuff like that. So this is setting the threshold to a higher level. So I recommend setting that. I'm going to click OK here. And here we go. Creator app image transfer to smartphone. You can connect using the app and so forth. Understand and close. There we go. So now it wants to perform a pixel mapping, optimize the image tensor. I'm going to click OK. It says to attach the lens cap before doing this. So I don't have the lens cap, so I'm just going to aim this down like so and click OK. And click OK there. All right, guys, so now what it's telling you is that this camera has the ability to swipe in and out and up and down, like different menus and stuff. So it's just giving you a visual indication of that feature. And click OK there. And here we are looking at the main screen. So if we swipe out, that's what it was talking about. So you can swipe out and swipe in to bring these buttons in and out. Now if we swipe upward, there's the function menu. And if we swipe down, you can get rid of that as well. All right, guys, I just wanted to go over the screen a little bit. It's a little easier to see when I'm just pointing down at the desk because the whole screen's black. So it's easy to see this stuff like blinking and everything. And remember before how I said when you hit the display button, it'll change the way the screen looks. As you can see here, there's the histogram, there's the leveler, so you can make sure the camera's level and stuff. And here's the main screen that we were just at. So anyways, if you're looking at the top left, that is the memory card, how many photos you'll be able to take with the current camera settings. Right now it is set to JPEG Fine, which is the next option over. Then we have large format, which is 26 megapixels. Next to that, we have the autofocus mode, which is in automatic right now. AFA stands for automatic. And over here on the right, we have the battery. So we're at 93%. And notice you could see the little plug next to it showing that it's plugged in. Now below that, we have the camera mode. And right now it's in full auto mode. And it's recognizing the scene as a very low light scene, so it has a picture of a little candle there. It also shows that next to it that the camera's on a tripod, and it just senses that the camera's like not moving, so it thinks it's on a tripod. Now below that is the drive mode right now. It is set to single shot. That's why it just looks like a box right there. Right here is the focus area. So right now it is set to wide area focus mode. And now down here we have the shutter speed. So it's set to 6 seconds right now because it thinks the room is dark black. And we have the aperture here, f3.5 is the aperture number. That's measured in f-stops. That's why there's an F there. The shutter speed is measured in time. So right now it's at 6 seconds. Now this blinking option right here is the metering mode. and it's basically acting as exposure compensation right now in the full auto mode. So it'll tell you if the camera is underexposed or overexposed via the exposure comp button over here, which is this button right there, but it won't let you do it because we're in full auto mode. So right here is the ISO and it's set to auto, and if we hit the ISO button here, again, we can't do anything because we're in full auto mode. So drive mode we can change. So we have multiple ways to get there. We could swipe over and there's a bunch of different options here, but you can also use the physical buttons here. So this button over here will also get you into drive mode. So you can see it's the second button here from the top, or I can hit this button here. And now you can see I'm in drive modes. And where I could just tap that button and we're in drive modes. See how that works? So you could use the screen or the manual controls depending on what you're trying to do. Now if we scroll down, this is continuous shooting. So this is where you would set the camera for like high speed shooting for sports, for example. And if you go left and right, notice in these menus, guys, when you see these little arrows, the left and right arrows, that means there's more options. And you can see there's more options right here. You can actually click and drag as well, but I just find it easier to step through sometimes using the controller here. But it is a touchscreen, just, you know, so. And mid's pretty good. Low will be nice and slow, but it'll take rapid fire shots. If you just hold the shutter down, I'll show you right now. I'll put it in medium, and now watch when I shoot. So it's taking multiple shots there. So that's how that works. If I go back into drive mode, I'm just gonna set it to self timer. So now we have self timer set. So if I go to take a photo now, see how the tally light's blinking and it's taking the photo. So self timer, that's how that works. And again, that is in drive modes. And then down here you have self timer with continuous. So it'll take 3 images, which is nice if you're doing like family portraits and stuff like that. You can set the self timer up to take 5 images. And again, left and right will give you all the different options. So that's what self timer continuous does. Now, if we scroll down here, because I'm in full auto mode, these are all grayed out, but this is where bracketing and stuff like that is, and it has bracketing for white balance, dynamic range optimizer, focus bracketing, single bracketing, and then it has continuous bracketing, which is what I use when I do HDR photography, for example. This is the mode I would use. I just wanted to show you a couple other features here. So now this next button down here is focus area. So if I click that, these are the different focus areas. And how you need to think about this is what controls where the camera will focus. So focus area, right now it's using like the entire screen. That's what wide area is. And if I just go down here, now I'm using zone focus. And you see how that box came up? That's gonna now limit the focus to just that zone. And that's actually how I'm using the A7 IV right now. So the A7 IV, I'm using zone focus, and I have it like in just that box right here. So it's gonna focus like on my face. That's what zone focus is. And like I said, with the camera I'm recording it right now, that's how I have it set. So it's not gonna focus on anything out here, you know, or anything like that. It's just like a box, and that's what that is. Now, if you go down one more, you have focus area. So focus area, you could see, looks like that, and you can actually move it around by touching the screen like so. And if you hit the center button, it'll now lock it to that position. So if you want to move the focus area again, you have to select it. So you can see here when you hit the center button, it's selecting it and those little arrows come up. So once those are up, then we could move it again. See that? Once we set it, now it won't move. It's actually, now the buttons are doing like their other task. But when you have it in the set button right here, you can see those little arrows. Now you can move it around. So that's focus area. And again, this is in full auto mode. You have this much power. So I'm just going to put it back to wide area here, like so. And if you press the shutter button, it'll bring it back to the screen so you can see what's going on. Now up here we have touch shutter, which basically when you touch this button, it's just going to focus and take the photo. That's what this button does. This is the record button, which acts as the same thing as the record button on the top of the camera. This is facial recognition. If we select that, it's going to cycle through the different targets. So we have animal. Now we have bird. Now we are back to human. Now zoom. So this is a cool zoom feature here. So you could just step through the different zooms if you want. Pretty nice feature. Let's turn that off. And then we have a playback button there. Now down here on the bottom left, we have a creative button. Now if we select that, it basically allows you to control the camera with much more power here, even though we're in full auto mode. So these are the different options. We have clear or defocus background. We have brightness, then we have color, And then we have auto over here, which is like presets. So let me show you what I mean. If we select background defocus, you could now just slide the bar, and that will basically change the background defocus. While in full auto mode, you could just change that. And basically what that's doing is changing the camera's aperture. So this is a way for you to control the depth of field without having to change the aperture. You can just use a slider to do that. Let's see here how you can just slide the slider. It's on defocus. I just put it back to clear, so you can see the background sharpened up a little bit, a little more information back there. Now let me put it back to defocus. You'll see how the water really gets nice and soft looking. And this is all happening while recording. So if you want everything sharp in the scene, you can drag this over to clear. If you want to take a portrait or something and you want the person in focus and the background blurry, you could leave that on defocus like so. That's basically what that button does. So if we click on this one, you have brightness, dark, and dark and bright. Then this one, you have color, warm and cool. And then over here, you have all these different presets. So this is where you can go and you can set your camera for all these different presets if you want to play around and give them a try. I got sepia, black and white, and a bunch of other ones. So if you press the shutter, it'll bring you back to the main screen here, and now you can see the creative modes are on. So this is up right now, so it's actually still working. So if we tap it again, it's just letting us know that it's going to reset all those settings. And it's like, okay, yeah, fine. So now you can see that that's off. So again, in full auto mode, guys, this is like the basic operation of this camera. So let me just show you what it looks like in the menu here in photo mode. So here is the menu, and on the left hand side is like the main hierarchy. So if you go like left to right, you can see here, if I go to the left, it's going to go back, and now I'm all the way over to the left. And then you have up here, you have my menu, you got main, you got the shooting menu. And again, if I go to the right, I can go through all these settings. If I go all the way over to the right more, I will be on the actual settings over there. See how it scrolls over? So it's like a hierarchy setup. Now if you scroll down here, you have exposure and color. You have autofocus, manual focus. This is the playback area. This is the network area. So this is where you can set up streaming, the creators cloud, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and so forth. This is the setup area. So this is where you can set your date and time. You could reset the camera. You can customize the camera, operation customize and all that stuff. A lot of options in here. All right, so let me just show you how this works really quick. All right, so when you press the shutter button here, it's focusing right now. That's what that beeping is. Let me unplug this, sorry. I still have self-timer set, so I'm just gonna switch it back to single shooting there. All right, there we have it. All right, so check this out. If we press the shutter button down, it's gonna focus. This is how the camera works by default, and because there's a face in the scene, it's gonna focus on that face. And there we go, we take the photo. Now, if we go into the playback menu here, we can use the zoom lever to zoom in, and it'll zoom right in to where it focused, and it focused on the eye. So you can see here how good that looks. Now you can turn the rear dial to zoom out, or you can just zoom out using the zoom lever, like so. Now if you press the shutter button, it'll go back to this mode where you're ready to take a photo again. Now this button here, remember how I told you all you have to do is touch it and it'll just automatically focus and take the photo? Watch this. That's how that works. Pretty cool, right? That's touch shutter. Now you can hit record. Even though we're in photo mode, you can hit record, and now it's recording video. And the camera by default is set up to HD 60 for some reason, so I'm going to show you how to change that in a minute to 4K, because this is a 4K camera. Want to use the best quality possible. So if we swipe up, let's go into the function menu here, and I will show you a couple of other things while we're still in full auto mode. So you do have like quite a bit of power in full auto. That's why I want to show you this. But a lot of the stuff is grayed out as well. So anyways, up here on the top right, you have skin smoothing. By default, this camera is set with skin smoothing on, just so you know. So if you're recording video, your skin is going to look smooth if you leave it on. And it actually works really well, in my opinion. So you might want to leave it on. Definitely will make you look a little younger, depending on what you're doing. It just softens the skin. It works really good. Try it and see what you think first, and you can change the level. You got low, medium, and high. All right, so I'm in selfie mode here in the studio, and I have the skin smoothing set to low, just so you guys can see what it looks like. So now I'm on skin smoothing medium, which is what the camera was on by default when I, turned it on. Now let me put it to high so you can see what high looks like. So this is what high skin smoothing looks like. Like, note what it does to the hair. It does a pretty good job. It works around the glasses and stuff. I used to not use it at all, but now I'm like, huh, I think I look a little younger. I'm just gonna leave it on medium. If we go in here, you can change it. You can see here, low, medium, and high. I'm just gonna leave it on medium. And I'm just gonna hit the function button on the back of the camera this time to bring it up. Instead of swiping up, you could do it either way. Now here is the shoot mode. So you can go in here and you can change your shoot mode. So you got program auto, aperture priority, shutter priority, and full-fledged manual mode. And then you have memory recall mode here. And then all the way at the bottom here, you have scene modes. Now this is very powerful, guys. This is where you want to go if you want to shoot in full auto mode, but you want to like dial the camera into a specific type of shooting environment. For example, portrait. So you have portrait here. If you go left and right, you have a bunch of different options. Sports. So you could put the camera in sports mode when you're at your kids' like Little League or soccer game or whatever, and the camera will then take all the precautions to try to get the best shots possible for sports. And scene modes are just fantastic for people that are new to cameras, new to photography and stuff like that. You can just go in here and the camera will, you know, dial the settings in for you. Landscapes. It just optimizes the camera for the given scene. That's why these are called scene modes. Then you got night shoot mode, night portrait, and back to portrait. So that's what that is. I'm just gonna go back to full auto here. Go back to the function menu. Now, I just wanted to show you a couple other things. We already showed you the focus area. So you can see you can get to this stuff in a couple of different ways. Here's focus area. It was also on that other menu on the side here when we were doing that. Now, subject recognition. This is where you can turn it on and off. Now, if you go in here, this is where you can turn facial recognition off. And if you do, it will still focus on the face if it's close to the camera, but it won't recognize the face. So if you put a product up, for example, it'll focus on that, not the face. But when facial priority is on, it will prioritize faces. Even if you're holding something up in front of the camera, it'll still prioritize the face. So if that's driving you nuts, that's what that product showcase feature is really for. The product showcase feature turns facial recognition on and off, just the push of a button. So again, if you're trying to take a photo and somebody's like holding something up and you're trying to focus on that item, and the camera just keeps focusing on the person's face, this is where you would go in and turn facial recognition off, and that would solve that problem. Then if somebody was holding something up in front of them, it would focus on that, because the camera will focus on whatever's closest to the camera by default, unless there's a face in the scene if you have facial recognition turned on. You turn that off and you hold something up, the camera's going to focus on what's closest to it, which will be a product, for example. That's how that works. So facial recognition is one of those features you're going to have to turn on and off depending on what you're doing, is the point. So function menu here, facial recognition, we already talked about that. Now here, touch function in shooting. So by default, it's set to touch tracking. So that's what that option is. If we go in here, you can see we have touch function in shooting, touch tracking. Now we can change it to just touch focus. So what that'll do is if you touch around the screen, it'll only focus. It won't track. So tracking will, if you have tracking enabled, it'll like stick to a subject. I'll show you what I mean here. Here's tracking. Now watch when I click on the face. So now the face is being tracked, and you could watch the focus point move with the face. Or yeah, see how it's tracking the face? It's like on the eye. And I could move it forward, back. It's going to track the eye because I have tracking enabled. So let's change this to focus. And now let me focus on the face. So you can see that little box is on the face and it's focused. And now if I take the photo, it'll, you know, the focus is there, whatever. So now if I move this over here, see how it's different than tracking? It's still there in the same spot, but now it's focusing on the background because it's not tracking the subject that we did a second ago. So that's the difference between tracking and focus. They're both focusing the camera. It's just tracking is like making the subject carry the focus. You know, it's like sticking to the subject and then the focus is following that subject. Just touch focus will keep the camera focused on a specific point, which again, very powerful depending on what you're doing. So that's what it does. Now, notice how there's a left and a right down here. That's because you can also control the auto exposure. You can have the auto exposure tied to tracking or tied to focus. So if you want to expose the scene, like if you're taking a picture of a really bright scene and you want the exposure to change where you touch, you can touch on like a bright spot and then the camera will expose for that bright area. So that's what auto exposure means here when you can tie it to the feature. So it'll basically, if I were to track this face, it would auto expose no matter where I move the face around. So the exposure might change. If the face were to walk into like a light source and the face were to light up really bright, the exposure would then change automatically because it's tracking that face with auto exposure priority on. Crazy power, right? This camera, so much power. Now if we scroll down, again, this is in full auto, it does all this. So if we scroll down, this is just touch shutter. So, and now if you just touch around the screen, it's going to focus and take the shot. So it does the same thing kind of as this one, but with touch shutter, it's going to, where you touch is where it's going to focus. If you just hit it here, it's going to use the focus area and decide what to focus on. And it's going to pick the face because I have facial recognition. But if I touch over here, it's going to ignore the face and focus on the background and then take the shot. Then when it's done, it's going to go back and refocus on the face because I have facial priority turned on. Incredible power. If we go back here, that's touch shutter. So then we have touch exposure. So you could just use touch for exposing. So now if I touch over here, the exposure is going to change. You could see how the screen got brighter. If I touch back here, you could see it's now exposing for the background. And look how much brighter the scene had to get. Now if I click on the face, it's going to expose for the face. You see that? So that's auto exposure by just touching around the screen. And it's a cool feature, especially if you don't know what exposure you need and you're not exactly sure, you know, if you want it darker or lighter, you can put it in this mode and touch around the screen and, you know, get it how you like it and then take the photo. So that's how that works. And you can actually turn the touch operation off right here. So if you're one of those people that doesn't want the screen to work when you're touching it, right here, you can just turn it off. I'm going to put it back to touch tracking. That's what I like to use most, and that's how the camera came by default. So one other thing in the function menu I wanted to show you here in full auto is the steady shot option. So you have an option to turn it on and off. And that is just basically optical stabilization, which this lens has. So you can turn that off if you're using a tripod, for example, but I recommend pretty much just leaving it on because the camera knows when it's on a tripod when in full auto. So it's okay, but in best practice, you would turn it off when on a tripod. You can zoom in and out here, guys, with the toggle. And you can see how far it's zooming in. Now, notice on the screen here, watch when it changes right there. So I'm at 50 millimeter. Now watch, see how a C came up and it says times 1.1? That's clear image zoom. And it goes all the way to 2 times. So that's extra zoom. Now it's a digital zoom, but it's a really high quality digital zoom. So you can't really tell that it's zoomed in. Like it does zoom in, but it's like such a good quality, like it almost looks like an optical zoom. So keep that in mind if you guys want a little extra zoom. It's on by default, but it only works in JPEG mode when taking photos. If you're shooting raw quality, it won't do that because it is digital. So it is what it is. Raw, you can't do clear image zoom, just so you know. And if you change the JPEG size, you can actually get a smart zoom as well. If I go into the menu here, let me show you. Go up to main. So here in main, when in photo mode, these are the different options. Now in full auto mode, you're very limited as to what you can do. This is your aspect ratio. So this is basically the shape of the image that you're taking. So you can have the image be more 4:3, which is like an 8:10, or you can do 16:9, which is like, you know, like a TV, 16:9, like a movie screen. And then 1:1 is a square. So this will basically crop the images for you on camera, so you don't have to do it after the fact if that's what you want. I tend to leave it in a 3:2 because that's the shape of the sensor, and that will yield you the highest resolution. If you change these aspect ratios, your resolution will actually change because it's using less of the sensor. So keep that in mind. Now over here is the JPEG size. Now look, if we go down to medium size here, which is 13 megapixel compared to 26 megapixel, now watch what happens when we zoom in. See now how when we get to 50, right there, watch Now it says S. See that? That's smart zoom. So what it's actually doing is it's using the full sensor, but because we're taking a lower resolution image, it could now zoom in on the sensor itself. So you're not getting any loss in optical quality because you're using a lower resolution. So it's actually giving you some extra zoom here with no loss in quality because, like I said, we're at the medium size JPEG file. So that's as far as we could go. Now, if I had the JPEG set to small, it would be able to go even further. So that's what smart zoom is, which is different than clear image zoom. Clear image zoom is actually like a digital zoom. It's just a very high quality digital zoom. Smart zoom is not. That's the actual sensor, like cutting in on the sensor. So it's not a digital zoom, which is pretty amazing. Smart. It's pretty smart. One thing I wanted to note, guys, when you are using clear image zoom and stuff like that, the touch function doesn't work anymore. So if you're trying to touch around the screen, it watch, like right here, see how it'll work? I have it set to focus, but when we go past, now it won't work. See that? We also have the option here for the flash mode. You can turn it to auto, slow sync, rear sync, flash off. So this is the autofocus mode here. I just want to go over really quick. So we have single shot AF, we have automatic, continuous, direct manual focus, and manual focus. So automatic AF will basically toggle between single shot AF and continuous AF. So let me show you what the difference is. So single shot, let me get the face back up here. Single shot will just focus and lock. Here it beeps and it just locks. That's AFS. Then it'll take the photo. So if I focus and lock it on the face here and now move the face, see how the focus is still there, the focus point? It's still locked. That's what single shot does. Now watch when I go and change that. And we can get to it from the function menu right here as well. So let's change it to autofocus continuous. So now watch what happens when I press the shutter button down. See how it's not beeping, but the box is coming up? So I still have the box on the eye, and I have the shutter halfway pressed here. So now watch what happens. Look at that, it's tracking the subject. See that? That's continuous autofocus. So it's prioritizing the face and continually autofocusing. So you can take a photo here, there, there, there. Pretty powerful, right? So if you're in AFA mode, if I go back, if you're in AFA mode here, it'll automatically detect if the subject is moving and it'll switch the camera to autofocus continuous. So that's what's cool about AFA, and that's why the camera comes like that out of the box, because it'll switch from AFS to AFC based on what the scene is looking like. So if it sees people running or whatever, or a car moving, it's going to automatically choose continuous autofocus. But you can override it in here, which is what I was just showing you. Now, direct manual focus. So direct manual focus will allow you to focus normally, but when the focus is locked, like right now, I could then turn the focus ring and fine tune it, like so. So I can fine tune the focus, get it absolutely perfect, like, you know what I mean? Assuming it's not focusing where I want, and then press the shutter all the way, and it'll take the photo. So that's what direct manual does. It works like auto, but then allows you to fine tune it. Like I said, this is awesome for if you're like taking pictures of flowers and stuff. Sometimes you'll like focus and it'll focus on the wrong part of the flower. Now with this camera, you could try touching on the screen to get it to focus where you want, but just sometimes it just doesn't work. It's just like it keeps picking the wrong thing or whatever the case may be. Like it might be a bug on the flower that you're trying to get it to focus on. So direct manual focus is a great tool for that because, like I said, you could just focus and then it'll fine tune, and you could move it around too. You can move the screen to like get a better view, and then you can fine tune the focus and take the shot when you have it right how you want it. So again, very powerful feature. Highly recommend checking that out. And then you just have full-fledged manual focus, which works with manual focus lenses, or if you just don't want any autofocus happening. This is a great feature if you just want to set the camera up, and if somebody walks in front of it, like you don't want the camera to like pick them up and change focus, manual focus is the mode for you. Great for like static shots. Manual focus is great for like long exposure shots. It's great for time-lapse type photography. If you're doing, you know, interval shooting and stuff like that, manual focus is a good way to go. Because remember, the camera can, if something comes in front of it, it might detect that and switch to that subject, especially if it's a face. So again, hard setting it to manual, the lens cannot change. You know, it's in manual focus. So it's just a powerful tool, and depending on what you're doing, you might want to use manual focus. I use it a lot myself in the studio here. Like an example of why I would use manual focus is if I had a camera set up like right here, and I just did a gimbal tutorial the other day, and I had a gimbal sitting on the desk here. And if I had autofocus set, every time I put my hand up or something, the lens would change and focus on my hand. And if you're looking through that view like that, the focus is going to switch from the gimbal to the hand, to the gimbal to the hand. And it's like, it just doesn't look professional. So what I did was I focused on the center of the gimbal and just locked it in manual focus. So this way, and then I had it up on my monitor here so I could see it. So when I was doing the gimbal tutorial, you know what I mean? When I put my hand up, it wouldn't focus on the hand, and my hand would be blurry, and it looked good. The focus stayed consistent. So it's much easier to watch, you know? It's not like, you don't get like sick when the focus keeps changing. It's hard to explain, but manual focus is awesome, like when you start to get the hang of it. And in certain scenarios, I highly recommend using it. So I just want to switch the mode here. So let me just switch the mode to aperture priority mode really quick. This is a slightly more advanced mode. This will allow you to control the aperture of the camera. I'm just going to put the autofocus back to autofocus A, automatic. So by default, this dial here is going to control the aperture, and you can see the number changing right here because I'm in aperture priority mode. So I have the power to control the aperture now with this dial. That's basically what that means. And notice now on the sides here, I have more options. So now I have this option for white balance over there. So we could change that if we wanted to. Let's go into the function menu here, and you can see we have a couple more options that are not grayed out. In particular, what we have here is the white balance, and we have the creative look. Now, we were still able to get to the creative look in full auto mode by hitting the button down here. So now it just switched in aperture priority mode to the actual creative looks. So it's like a little bit more advanced way of using the camera. But white balance here, this is what controls how cool or how warm the image is. By default, auto white balance works great. The downside of auto white balance is that sometimes it will fluctuate though. So for a more professional look, you really do want to hard set the white balance to whatever lighting conditions you're currently in. Like I have everything configured in the studio, for example, for 5200 degrees is the temperature. So that's how I have it set in here. So it's not fluctuating. You know what I mean? Like my skin tones are going to be consistent. So if you're outside in the sun, you know, you could set it to sunny weather, you know, like the sun here, daylight mode it's called. Then you got shade, and you can see how it's changing on the screen. You see that? How it's getting like blue, tungsten. That's because tungsten lights are so yellow, so it's going to compensate by making the image more blue to compensate for the yellow light source. And down here, if you keep going, you got white balance underwater. Now here is the Kelvin mode. This is actually what I like to use most. So if you go over, you can actually dial the white balance in by color temperature. So remember, I told you I have my studio set to 5200. So right here should be the most accurate white balance for my current studio. So that's what white balance does. And you also have custom white balance. So this is where you can go and you can set custom white balance. This is the next level more advanced. So custom white balance will get your colors as accurate as possible. And what you can use is a gray card or something like that to get your custom white balance. You basically take a photo of the gray card in the current lighting conditions you're at. And because the gray card is a specific gray, the camera will see that and it can like really accurately get the white balance, and then you could save it as a custom. Then set the camera to that custom white balance, and now you're locked in at like the perfect white balance because you just configured it, you know, in the camera itself, in the light, you know, using a gray card. So that's the most advanced way to do it. I actually have a tutorial on how to set custom white balance if you guys have never done it before. Again, it's a little more advanced, but that's what this option is here. All right, so the one other thing I want to show you before we go into video mode is the ISO area, because now we have the ability to change that. So we can hit this button right here to go into ISO, and you can see how it popped up on the bottom. Or we could hit the ISO button on the back dial here, which will bring us in to this version. So you can see how the display of the ISO is different depending on which way you go in. Not all the features are like that. I'm not exactly sure why Sony chose to do it that way, but that's how it works. So if you go in using the button on the back of the camera, you get this menu like display. Here's what I wanted to show you. If you go to the right, you can go down here, and this is where you can set your ISO auto minimum. So you can set your minimum to the lowest number here, which is 100, but you could change it if you want. And then the maximum you can raise up, which is what I want to do. I want to set this to like 12,800. So now my max ISO is 12,800, and the lowest it'll go is ISO 100. Notice here on the left, you can actually change the ISO to 50, but you can't do that in auto. So the lowest auto ISO you can have is 100. And you can see that by having the line under it. See how the 100 has no line, but the 80 does? That's how that works. So these are like expandable ISOs. So this is helpful in really bright conditions. If you need a slower shutter speed, using ISO 50 can be helpful sometimes. So that is pretty much the last thing I wanted to show you in photo mode here. Let me just go back in the menu and change this back to large, like so. And there we have it. All right, guys, let's switch this into video mode here, and I will show you how that works. So now we are on video mode, and you see how much it cropped in? Like, watch when I go back out. See, I'm going, that's photo mode, now video mode. It like cropped in quite a bit, and you might wonder, why did it crop in like that? Well, if you hit the function button here, if you go into stabilization, remember I showed you that a second ago in photo mode, right there it's set to active mode. That's why it cropped in. Active stabilization is a digital stabilization, and it does help a lot if you're like hand holding it and walking and stuff like that, or if you're walking and just hand holding in general, it helps a lot. So you do want it on if you're hand holding, but if you're using a tripod or you're using a gimbal, I recommend turning it off because that'll give you a much wider view. So watch what happens when I change it from active to standard. See that? So that's the crop right there. So standard and then off, it's not going to crop. Standard is just the optical stabilization. If this camera had sensor stabilization, it would be that as well, but it doesn't. So it's just optical stabilization. Active is that digital. So that's why it's zooming in like that, just so you guys know. So I'm just going to put it in standard for now, because I have limited space here on my desk for this demonstration here. So now you can see these menus look a little bit different. We have different options. We have the product showcase option right here, which is also the garbage can button on the back of the camera. So product showcase will turn facial recognition on and off. Remember how I told you that? So you can see how it's focusing on the eye. Watch when I turn product showcase on. See how the eye AF is not coming up anymore and it's just focusing? That's what it does. It turns facial recognition on and off. Now it's going back to the eye. See that? So it's prioritizing the face. Now we have a record button up here to start recording if you want. So you can start recording and then you can zoom in, zoom out while recording. You can also hit the background defocus button right here while recording, and it'll switch the camera to background defocus mode. And then now it's background clear. Defocus. I'm going to leave it in defocus. Now there's a new feature here. If you notice on the bottom, there's an S1 button. What that does is, while you're recording video, it adds a shot mark. See that? So it'll add shot marks to your video. Whoops. See, now when you miss a button, that's the tracking box that just came up. See that tracking box? If I click over here, there's the tracking box. You see it? So if you miss one of these buttons, that tracking box is going to come up if you have it enabled. So right on the top of the screen here is the box to cancel it. You see that little box? It has a little X. That'll cancel the touch tracking that I just enabled when I tried to hit this button. Or you can hit the center button on the back dial. That will also cancel it. See, it went away? So now check it out. Shot mark. Shot mark. I'm just adding shot markers. I can zoom in here. Say I want to get a good portrait shot, right? Add a shot mark right there. There you have it. So stop recording. So you might wonder what shot marks do, and it's a new feature. So let me just show you that in the menu, because a lot of people have asked me over time, like when recording video, how do you take photos? Because a lot of cameras have that feature, and Sony's didn't really have that. So not like this. Now it's basically you can do it while recording video. They had a way using the photo extract feature where you can go into a video file and extract a photo, but you had to do that through the playback menu and stuff. I have a video on that for the older cameras. But with this new feature, you can add the shot marker, but you have to enable a setting in the menu. So let me just show you that really quick. So if we go into the menu, into the shooting area, and we scroll down all the way to shoot option, right here, auto create still image. See that? Turn that on. Don't show again, that's fine, okay. Now watch when we hit record. I'm going to add a couple of shot markers. There's one. Zoom in a little bit. There's another one. Zoom in a little more. All right, so there's 3 shot markers. I'm going to stop recording. Now watch. It's going to create the photos right now and save it to the memory card automatically. How cool is that? So if we go into the play, there's the video, there's the photo, there's the other photo, and there's the other photo. So now with the ZV-E10 Mark II, you can take photos while recording video if you just enable that feature, and it'll automatically put them right to the memory card. Super pumped about this feature. It's so cool, and highly recommend using it, because why wouldn't you if you want to take photos when recording video? So it's cool. You can use the camera in selfie mode, and you could take like photos of yourself and stuff even, you know? All right, guys, so we have a couple more buttons on the right-hand side here. So we have the top one, which is the mode. So again, we can change the shoot mode. Right now it's an intelligent auto, which works great. Highly recommend starting in intelligent auto and working your way up to the more advanced modes. We have program auto, which is the next level. It'll give you a little more power, but it's still pretty much full auto. Then we have aperture priority mode, where with this dial, you can change the aperture, so you'll have control of that. Shutter priority mode will give you control with this dial to change the shutter speed, so shutter priority. Then manual mode will give you control of the aperture and the shutter speed, so you can manipulate them with the dial and the rear control dial on the back. And then we have memory recall mode here, which you can set the camera up to a specific setting, how you like it, and then you can recall that setting with the memory recall feature. So that's good if you have like a mode that you use that requires a lot of different setting changes. You can save that here, and then you can just recall it, and you won't have to go in and change all those settings. So that's what memory recall is for. It's going to go back to auto. Now below that, you have self-timer here. So you can enable 3-second self-timer for when recording video, and you can actually change it to 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and so forth. You could do it only once, or you can have it repeat. That's pretty cool. So I usually don't use it, but if you guys, you know, you're recording and then you got to run and you got to get in front of the camera in the right spot, it's a cool feature for that purpose. You know what I mean? So it just depends on what you're doing. So now below that are the mic options. So if we click that icon, you could see it's going to cycle through the different mic options. So some of these features act as like a cycle when you click them in this mode, but when you go into them from the function menu, they'll expand and give you more options. So right now, the microphone is set to front. So if this person here, like if this was a person talking, it would be optimized for that. Right now it's set to all directions. So it's going to record all around. Now here it's just going to record from the rear, which is what I would want if I was behind the camera and I was like narrating. I would want it set to rear, and then it'll ignore everything in the front. So that's what this does. Now if we go into the function menu and we go into audio, see how it displays differently like this other way? Just similar to how the ISO feature worked. So again, not a big deal, but just want to make you aware of how it's a little bit different. Now below the microphone is one of the coolest new features for this awesome creator camera, and that's called CineVlog. CineVlog basically turns this into a cinematic machine with the option to manipulate it without having to know anything really. All you got to do is hit this CineVlog button. So if you hit the CineVlog button, you can see it crops in to a Cinescope crop mode. So it's like a nice widescreen look, and it defaults to S-Cinetone, and it gives you a couple of options. And this stuff is all push button. And you can, once CineVlog is on, you can manipulate all this stuff while it's recording. Like check it out, like I'm recording right now. So we can go in and we can change the S-Cinetone. There's a couple different options there, see that? So if we go over, we have clean, we have chick, we have fresh, and we have mono. And so those are the different like cinematic modes that you have. But then in addition to that, we have like looks for each one of those modes. So you have these different looks that apply to each one of these different like main modes. So you have auto, gold, ocean, forest, and back to auto. So auto is basically auto white balance for whatever mode you're currently in. Gold adds like a nice warmth to it. Ocean adds a cool look, and forest adds like a green look. So that's how that works. Now, this other button here that says AFM, if you click on that, that will control your autofocus transition speed. So you can set it to low, medium, or high. So I'm going to set it to low. And the focus will transition a little bit slower when recording video. Like if I switch to the background here, you can see how it's going much more slowly. Zoom out a little. We switch to the face. It's just going to go a little slower. And you can change this while recording, which is incredible. So now I'm going to switch it to high. All right, so now I have the autofocus set to high here. You can see it says AFH. And if I go to the background, it's going to focus much quicker. See how fast it's going now? Doesn't look as cinematic that way. So I'm going to put it back to low. I prefer it on low. Now, if you're a subject that is moving in and out kind of quickly in front of the camera, you're going to want it on at least medium, because slow might be a little too slow. But for doing like focus transitions, like for landscape stuff, I like it having it nice and slow. It looks really smooth and cinematic. So that's how CineVlog works. So I just got to hit stop record. And now I can turn CineVlog off. See that? So again, that's how CineVlog works. Now on the bottom, we have that creative option again. And see, I just hit the tracking. You can see tracking cancel. You gotta hit the button perfectly. There we go. So now the creative options came up, and I already showed you this in photo mode. It works exactly the same in video mode. So while recording, you can control this stuff. So you can go in here, you can change your defocus to clear and all that, change your brightness, change your color. So I'm just gonna stop recording. And I'm going to turn that off, and it just warns you that it's going to reset all the stuff that you had set. That's fine. Okay, no problem. And that's pretty much how that works. Now, if we swipe up and go into the function menu, I already showed you before, we have the skin smoothing options, you got the tracking options, but what is different is this one here. You have the audio record level. So this is where you can control the level, and you can see it up here. You got the levels, and you want to make sure that they're not clipping. Like if you see them hitting the red or the orange, it's going to be clipping. So right around here is looking good. And you also have the focus mode. So you can change it to continuous, because remember, video, it kind of has to be in continuous because it's constantly recording. But you could lock the focus down by just switching it to manual focus. And then you have skin smoothing for video as well. So I'm leaving it on medium. I think it works pretty darn good, especially for this type of camera. Now, guys, if we go into the menu here, I just want to go into the main area. Now, the main area for photo mode, video mode, and S&Q mode will basically show like the key settings. So if I go over to the right, here's where the settings are for video. So now in the top box, this is where you have frame rates. Now the frame rates are going to change depending on what record mode you are in. Now, by record mode, I mean file format and record setting. So for example, if I want to set this to XAVCS 4K, which is what I like to use, I'm going to set it to that. Then you can go in here and you can set your record setting. So this is like the data rate, like how much data is going to be tied to the footage. So the best quality is going to be this 140 422 10-bit option. So that's how I have that set. So the record setting and the file format are now set to the quality that I want. Now I can go up here and I can select my frame rate. So I have 3 different frame rate options for this setting. So if I set it to 24p, you could notice now that this changed. See, the record setting now went back to 60 meg, so you have to go in there and change it back. So I want that at 100 meg 422, like so. Now if we go up here to the frame rate, let's change it to 60p. Notice again how this option changed. So let's go down there and change that to the best quality right there, 200 422. So now that we did that once, watch what happens when we change to 30p. See, it held it. So now it remembers where we want it for the record setting. But I did have to go in there and do it once first. See, now it's at 100 instead of the 60 like it was before. So that's how that works. Now you can you get different options here, like again, depending on what mode you're in. So if I change it to HD, let's put it on HD now. And let's go up to the frame rate and put it on 120p. So this is where you can get that slow motion 120p HD. So you go in here. Now, if we go over to the record setting, I'm going to put it at the best quality. So you can only get HD 120 in 8-bit 420. So that's the best quality for 120p. So that's how that works. And then we can go to 24. And again, when we go in here, you're going to have to go back up and select 10-bit, depending on what frame rate you're using. Go to 30. Let's put that on 10-bit. 60. Put that on 10-bit. There we go. So now we have everything set to pretty much the best quality for this mode, which is what I would use pretty much for 120. Or if I was recording for a really long time and I didn't really need to use 4K. But by default, this is how I have it set. X AVC S 4K, 24p. That's where I want it. And then I have it set to this 100, 422, 10-bit. So if you guys want the best quality possible, you're going to want to use this SI format. Now, these file sizes are gigantic and it's going to eat up your memory card really fast, but this is the best quality possible. So if we go here and we put it on 24, you could see what the data is. It's 240 compared to 100. So it's more than double the amount of data being written to the card, you know? So keep that in mind. If we put it in 60, you can see that's 600 meg, right? That is a gigantic amount of data that's going to be going to the memory card. So it is going to fill the memory cards up really fast. So please keep that in mind when using the SI mode. That's why I like using this mode. It's reasonable. 100 meg, colors look great, 422 10-bit. It's a nice compromise. The other option I like to use is the HS mode. So the HS mode is basically the same quality as the regular S mode, except it compresses the footage more. So you'll get more record time, but the problem is the computer is going to have to fight that codec a little bit to unpack it because it's compressed more. So if you have a really good computer, like a new Mac or something like that, you know, like a high quality computer that can render video footage like really well, you can have this set to HS and the computer will have no problem. Like my computer can do it no problem, but I've been using S lately just because if you don't have a good computer, you know, it's going to be an issue to like play back choppy is what will happen. So just food for thought. The S is much easier for the computer to digest. So think of it like that. Now, if we scroll down, notice how there's two main for video. We got main 1 and main 2. So this is where we can enable log shooting, which is extremely powerful. So log shooting basically will get you the maximum dynamic range that this camera is capable of. Now, the images come out like flat looking, kind of similar to when you shoot raw quality when taking photos. It's similar to that. So it basically gives you that log footage, you bring it into your video editing software, and then you have to grade the footage. Now, by default, you can't use log in full auto mode. The camera is doing all that work for you. And again, on a beginner-oriented camera like this, that's probably how most people will use it, using the cine vlog modes and things like that, and in auto and stuff. But as you get more experienced and you get more advanced, you might want to dabble into log footage because that is like the next level in quality. But again, it requires more work because now you have to grade the footage. Also, it's a little bit harder to tell what the exposure is when using log mode. So it's a little bit more challenging when looking at the screen, like to see what's going on just because it looks so much more flat. So I just got to change my shoot mode. So let's just put it in manual mode here and pretend that I want to do some log. So now if I turn the log on, it turns into a flexible ISO mode. It defaults to S-Gamut 3 Cine S-Log 3, which is what you want in my opinion. You can also load LUT files to your SD card. Again, more advanced, but if you do that, you can embed it right here and it'll bake it into the file. It won't actually change the way the footage looks, but it will like bake it into the metadata. So if you use like Catalyst Browse or the Sony editing software, you can output the LUT if you want. You can export the footage with the LUT from the Sony software, but otherwise it's just going to be in the metadata, so it doesn't actually change your log footage like to the SD card, even though it seems like it would based on it saying embedded like that, but it's just writing it to the metadata. So that's what that does. And now you can see looking at the screen how flat it looks. Like the log footage, it looks pretty darn flat. And the display LUT on is basically making the screen so it's less flat than it would be otherwise. Watch when I turn this off. See how flat it is now? That's with no LUT on. And what I mean by LUT is a display LUT. So it's just making it look like what it's kind of going to look like when you're done editing the footage. So if I go back in here and I enable it, turn it on, you can see it's like less flat. It still looks flat, but it's like less flat. So it's a little bit easier to see what you're doing when you have that display LUT enabled. So that's what that does, in case you were unaware. All right, guys, so in video mode, I just wanted to go around the screen real quick and just show you there's a couple other things. So you just got the audio meters here on the very top left. You have what configuration the mic is currently set to. It's in auto right now. You have autofocus continuous. That'll say MF if it's in manual focus. You have standby. That'll switch to record when you hit record, as you can see there. You have the quality that you're in, 4K 24. And then you have how much time you can record on the memory card. You got the battery life on the right. Now we already went over these buttons. I can swipe them right out of the way. On the bottom here, over here you have your mode that the camera's in. So it sees a human, so it's showing a picture of a little humanoid figure there. It thinks it's on a tripod because it's sitting on the desk. And then you got your shutter speed, 1/48th, which is double the frame rate, if you notice. Frame rate is 24p, double that is 1/48th. Then you have the aperture. Then you have your ISO here. It's set to auto. That's why the A is there. And then you have auto white balance. Now, if I hit the display button here, you have a couple of different options. This one's just showing you what the control wheels will do, but we're in full auto, so they won't do anything. This is the histogram, so this will help show what the exposure looks like. This is very useful when shooting in log in particular. You're really going to want to have that histogram up there. And this is the leveler, so you can see those levelers on the screen there. It'll show you if the camera's level or not. See that? I really like that feature. I use it all the time when I'm trying to get the tripod perfectly level. All right, so now if we switch the camera to S&Q mode here. So here in S&Q mode, we have the slow motion and quick motion options as the top one. And then you have your different modes that you can pick from within that mode. Then down here, we have the time-lapse option. So this, again, will record and put the time-lapse right to the SD card. And this is where you can go and change that. And again, it has auto and a bunch of different options here. You know, just like the regular shoot modes. If you go into main, again, in the menu here, you got your options for this mode. So if you go up, you could then change your options. This is where you can change your quality and so forth. So right now that's set to 60. I want to change that to 140. Now we can go up here and change the settings. So this is the record frame rate. So I want 24p because that's what my timeline is in my video editor. I edit all my videos and export for YouTube at 24p. That's like the way I like to do it. I'm not telling you you have to do that. I'm just saying that's what this frame rate option is. So that's the output. So this is the actual frame rate that will dictate how fast or slow the video footage is. You can see right now at 1 frame per second, this is going to be 24 times quick motion video. So if we change this to 2 frames, 12 times, 6 times, 3 times, and so forth. So let's go to 60 frames per second because we're in 4K, so that's the highest frame rate. So 60 frames per second will yield us 2.5x slow motion. So this will give us a slow motion video. Now, if we change the record format, if I just go back by hitting the menu button and we go to HD, we can change this back to the high quality. Now we can output this, again, 24. Now we can raise this to 120. See that? So that's going to yield us 5 times slow motion. So now we have the camera set to 5 times slow motion. Let's just change this to the higher 10-bit option. Like that. And now we have the camera set up, again, 5 times slow motion. So if we hit the record button, it's going to record, and we're going to get a nice slow motion video baked right into the camera, which is just a lot of fun. And that's how this works. So that is the S&Q mode function. And again, you can change the mode here and go into time-lapse. And right now, by default, it is set to 1 second. And let me just show you this quick time-lapse I took down at the Green Bridge. So if we go into the menu here, you can scroll up. And again, this is where you can change your options. So right now, it's set to 60p. So I'm going to change that to 24. And then we interval here. Shooting time required for a 5-second recording. So we're looking at 2 minutes. So if we record for 2 minutes, we'll end up with a 5-second long time lapse. That's what we're going to end up with. So if we have it set like this. So I'm just going to scroll down and I want to put it on 4K. And we'll put this back to 24, like so. Click OK. Now I'm going to go down and make the quality the best, like so. So now we're ready to go for a time lapse. And it's once you have it set up, it's going to remember those settings. So if we switch it to, video mode or whatever, and then we go back into S&Q mode, it's going to remember the settings. We go back to main, you can see it's set up for time lapse. We're good to go. And you can just hit record and the time lapse will start. So that is the 3 main modes and the basics of how they work, particularly from a more beginner-oriented perspective, okay? So I showed you how to change the modes if you want to get into the more advanced modes, but I didn't really show you how they work that well. I really just wanted to give you a good overview of how the camera works. So let's go into the menu system, guys. I want to break down some of the options in the menu that I really think you need to know about, and we'll go through some of those features quick. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the lab, and I'll do a live demonstration where I go a little bit deeper into the aperture priority mode, shutter priority mode, and manual mode in particular. And I just wanted to show you how those 3 modes like work in the lab environment, because I can simulate shutter speed and stuff like that to show you exactly how it works. So we'll do that in a minute, but I just want to go through the menu here to show you some of the key items that I found and stuff that I think you definitely want to know about and may or may not want to change. So let's do that. All right, guys, so we're going to go in the menu here, but what you need to keep note of is what mode you are in, because the menu does change a little bit, not completely, but there's definitely differences depending on what mode you are in. So let's start off in photography mode, and then I'm going to have to change it to video mode to show you a few things. But again, let's just start there. We'll go into the menu. Now, again, we talked about this before, but I'll mention it again. We have a hierarchy here on the left of all the key main settings. So up top is the My Menu area. Now, you can go in here and you can load up items. You can load up the items that you use most, that you want to save to the My Menu area. So lens compensation, for example, I want to save that to My Menu. So I'm going to click that, click My Menu, and then it's going to say adds to this location, added. So now if I go back, see the My Menu 1 area, I have lens compensation there now. So that's pretty cool. So here's where lens compensation is. And notice how it doesn't have focus breathing because I'm in photo mode. So watch what happens when I change it to video mode. And I go to lens compensation. See how I have a different option now? Breathing comp. Breathing compensation is a new feature that this lens supports and the ZV-E10 Mark II supports. And what it does is when you do a focus transition on the edges of the screen, you'll see, depending on what lens you're using and how big of a focus transition you're actually doing, it'll look like it's zooming, like there's like a zoom effect. And that's what's called focus breathing. And again, depending on what lens you're using and so forth, it can be very distracting. So focus breathing, when you enable it, it'll crop in a little bit and it kind of eliminates that zooming effect. So that's what focus breathing is. I just wanted to show you that really quick. And I also wanted to illustrate again how the menus are different depending on what mode you're in. So let me put it back in photo mode here, go into the menu. So that's the My Menu area, so that you could, like I said, you could load that up with a ton of crap. I usually have a couple of pages worth of stuff in there, which I already did, by the way. I had it loaded up, but I had to reset the camera for you guys because I wanted to show you what this looked like out of the box. So anyways, remember I told you I'm using the directional pad here, but you can also touch around. You can touch this stuff, and you can, go to different settings, whatever, and so forth. I'm just going to cancel that. So I'm just going to go back over here to the right because I prefer using the navigation wheel when it comes to this stuff. I don't want to accidentally click. So again, we got the main one. We already talked about that. So if we go down here, this is the shooting menu. Now, in here is where we have the image quality. So you can see we have 1, and there's 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's an arrow at the bottom, meaning there's even more. See? Boom, boom, boom. And shooting option. So here we go. We got image quality and record settings. So if we go over to the right, this is where you can switch to the newer, higher quality format right here, the 422. So this is going to be a better quality JPEG image. The only thing I don't know 100% about this file format is how friendly it is as far as computers, phones, iPads, things like that, recognizing it. By now it probably does, but off the top of my head, I just don't know. So just one bit of caution there if you enable it. I usually just leave it in JPEG mode myself because I tend to shoot RAW mostly. But if you want a higher quality JPEG, this will be a better. Now again, file format, you can change that to JPEG plus RAW or RAW. And then we got compressed or uncompressed. Lossless would be your best possible quality. Just going to be a larger file and stuff. JPEG quality, extra fine would be the best there. Then we got size. Again, you can change the size of the JPEG. So if you don't need the resolution and you're taking like a ton of photos, you could lower the resolution and get way more photos on your memory card. So that's a cool option that's in there. Aspect ratio, we already talked about. File format, we already talked about. This is just where the 4K settings are and stuff. I'm in photo mode. It's just reminding me that I'm in photo mode. So I'm just going to click menu and go back. I'm just going to keep going down. We got movie settings. So again, it's letting me know that I'm not in movie mode, and you can change those settings in here. I prefer to do it from the main menu, but I'm just showing you that even though we're in photo mode, those movie settings are in here, but the focus breathing one wasn't. You see what I mean? It's like kind of strange, but that's why I'm kind of going over this in such detail. You got a color space option here. You can change it to Adobe RGB if you prefer your workflow. And then I already told you about lens compensation. We added that to my favorites, but that's where that is. So notice if we keep scrolling down, it's switching from 1 to 2. Watch. See how I'm on 2 now? So if we go back, you can see I'm now on the number 2 option, which is media. And then number 3 would be file. But if you stay over to the right and just keep scrolling down, it will continue to scroll down through the different options here. So here's where you can go to format your card. I'm not going to do that. Recovery image database. So if you're having problems, you can try to recover the database there. Display media info. This is where you can go to find out how many images and how much time you have left on your memory card for photos and recording video. Now we got file and folder settings. You can go in here and you can actually change the name of your file, which is super cool. I highly recommend doing this. You can go in here and you can change the name. So if I just go up, hit enter and backspace, delete that, and I'm just going to put in here Z. So I'm just going to set it. It says you can set the first 3 letters there, so I'm just going to set it to ZVE, and then I'll know it's files from the ZV-E10. Pretty cool. That's how that works. So again, you can see a sample of what the file will look like when you take a photo now. It's very nice if you're using multiple cameras, guys. I have all my cameras set up this way. My A7C II, the A6700, and the A7 IV. The A6400 didn't have that option, I don't think, at the time. But great feature, and it's super helpful, again, when you're importing multiple cards from multiple cameras, you know, when you're organizing your files and things like that. It's just helpful to have it in the file name. So highly recommend doing that. Copyright info, you can go in here and you can add copyright info. You can turn it on or off, and then you can set the photographer name. This is a very nice feature, powerful for those that are interested in stuff like this. And same thing, you can write the serial number to the files if you want. Camera set memory, this is where you can go and you can set the camera up to a certain configuration however you want. And because we're in photo mode, that's what this is applying to. So you can go in here and you can see all the settings that it will save. And we have 3 different settings here. The ones with the M mean it'll save it to the memory card if you want extra ones. But 1, 2, and 3 are just 3 different camera modes that you can recall. But this is where you would go to save them. And again, these are all the different settings that it keeps track of. So it won't keep track of everything, but this is quite a bit of stuff that it will keep track of. I'll just click OK. So we just registered that. Now shoot mode, this is the different shoot modes that we're in. Right now it's in aperture priority mode, but you can change it to full auto and so forth. That's what that means. A lot of these features are redundant to the main screen, like up top that we showed you earlier. I'm just going to keep scrolling down. Drive mode, again, we talked about that. Now bracket settings, if you go in here, self-timer during bracketing, I'm going to enable this to 2 seconds. I definitely do prefer that because bracketing takes multiple shots. So it's nice to not be touching the camera when you're doing that. So I like to set the self-timer, then it'll go 2 seconds, and then boom, 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 it'll fire off the bracket. Bracket order, you know, you can change that if you want. Focus bracket settings. So let's say I wanted to add bracket settings to my menu. Watch what happens when we hit the garbage can. Because remember, the garbage can by default will give you more information about a given feature. But now when you hit the garbage can, it's giving you the option to add it to my menu. Let's do that. We'll add it to my menu. We'll put it right below lens comp. Very cool. Now let's hit it again, and let's go to in-camera guide, which is what it used to be by default. Sets bracket shooting. All right, well, there's not much info there. But if we go over here, and then we hit the garbage can again, it gives us info on that. So now notice how this one, it just went right to the information, so we can't actually add this to my menu. But bracket settings itself, we can. So here's the description for that, whether or not to enable self-timer, blah, blah, blah. So that's how that works. But I just wanted to show you how, if you click the more info button, like the garbage can, how you can just add that feature to my menu now, which is so cool. All right, so scrolling down, we got interval shooting function. This is for time-lapse photography. So this is if you want to do the real deal time-lapse, not the S&Q version, which bakes the file in, right, and turns it into like a movie file. That's different. This is time-lapse for photos, where it's going to interval shoot and take high-resolution images. So you're going to get 26 megapixel frames at intervals based on how you have it configured here. So this is for the best quality time-lapse, and it'll allow you to do a lot more editing in post because you have so much more resolution to work with. You could do like really good zooms and pans because you have such high resolution. So anyways, this is where you go and enable it. So when you turn this on, the camera is then in interval shooting mode. So you got to remember and know that it's on or off. So let's just turn it on for a second. Interval shooting start time, 1 second, shooting interval. So it's going to take a second before it starts, then every 3 seconds it's going to take a photo, and it's going to take the number of photos total is going to be 30. And then the auto exposure tracking sensitivity, this is what it's referring to is if you're like outside and like the sun is rising or setting or whatever, this will control the exposure automatically. And how quickly it'll change. You know what I mean? Like you might not want the exposure to change over the course of like 2 shots. You want it spread out over the course of like 10 shots. So that's what this stands for, and you can change that to low, medium, or high. And then shoot interval priority. So it's basically if your exposure is going to be longer than your interval, that's going to cause a conflict. And it's just referring to like, what do you want to do? Do you want to prioritize the interval or the exposure? That's what that is. So by default, it's prioritizing the exposure, not the interval. So you can see here on the bottom of the screen, if I zoom in, it's a little easier to see. See how it says 3 second right there? That's how you know that interval shooting is currently enabled. So watch what happens when we start here. Let me zoom out again. There's the first shot. Now every 3 shots, it's going to take a photo. See that? I'm going to move it around, create my little interval time lapse, make it look like the guy's dancing. But anyways, that's how that works. And you could just stop it by hitting the shutter button and it'll stop. But like I said, like if you turn the camera off right now and turn it back on, interval shooting is enabled. So you got to remember to disable it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the garbage can and I'm going to add this to my menu. Put it right below bracket settings. Perfect. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to turn it off. So scrolling down, here we have silent mode settings, and these options are also in the function menu here. You see this little option with the off? That's the silent mode setting. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in the function menu here, but that's what that is. And it's also in the menu right here. So if you go into silent mode settings, you can go in here and you can turn it on. And different functions, you can, make it so the autofocus is a little bit quieter. That's what that drive AF stands for. Now, release without lens is enabled. The reason why that's enabled, you don't want to shoot the camera without a lens, all right? Just so you know. You always want to have a lens attached. But the reason why this feature is there is because some lenses are fully manual. Like 7 Artisans, for example, makes these amazing fully manual lenses that are very affordable. I have a whole bunch of them. I love them. But because there's no electronics, when you mount that to the camera has no idea that that lens is attached. That's why this feature is there. So, but at the same time, it will allow you to take photos without a lens attached with the sensor exposed, which you never want to do. Be cautious about that, but that's what this feature is. That's why if you don't have the lens mounted, it will take photos, and you might be like, why is it doing that? That's the reason. I've gotten quite a few questions about people asking me if they can use the camera without a lens. No, you cannot. You have to use a lens. So continuing on here, we have release without card. This basically just means the camera will take photos if you don't have a memory card in there. You may or may not want that. It can screw you up if you have this enabled, because if you go to take photos, it looks like it's working. You know what I mean? But at the same time, if there's no memory card in there, it says no card on the screen and it's flashing. Like watch when I... See how it says no card flashing right there? So that will be flashing if there's no card, but it's happened to me a couple of times, guys. That's why I'm telling you. So it really sucks when you're taking photos and then you realize you don't have a memory card in there and you didn't notice that that thing was flashing. But it happens. It's happened to me several times. So you might want to turn this feature off in the menu. So anti-flicker shooting will allow you to manipulate the shutter speed, like by fine-tuning it. And why you would want to do that is sometimes like the frequency of lights, like fluorescent lights and stuff, and LED lights nowadays are everywhere, and it causes insane flicker problems. Particularly when recording video, you could notice it more, but it definitely happens with photos too. So you can actually enable this, but you need to be in shutter priority mode. So if we go into shutter priority mode here, and we go back into anti-flicker, now we can turn it on, see? And then we got right here on the bottom, that is the shutter speed. And look how we can change the shutter speed now to these like weird numbers. You can like dial it in. So you can scroll to change it quickly to different values, and then to fine tune it, you can go up and down. See that? So we're getting these really specific shutter speeds, and that will help cancel out the flickering. You can see how the flickering stopped on my display here, my Anta Mini Extreme right there. Watch when I change the shutter speed, you'll see the flickering start. See that right there? That's what this fixes. So it's pretty powerful, and you can see right there it fixed it. That's how this works. So that's what anti-flicker is. And again, depending on your situation, what you're up to, it's a nice feature that can really save your results and keep you from getting really crappy results in some situations. In all fairness, you probably won't notice when recording, but when you're watching your footage after the fact, you'll notice it and you'll be like, oh no, it's like ruined, you know? But the next time you go out, you're going to be prepared and you're going to remember this feature. So keep that in mind, all right? Go into the menu here. Steady shot, again, we're in photo mode. You can turn that on and off. In video mode, you have active stabilization and standard stabilization. In photo mode, you just have on and off because it's just the lens optical stabilization. Now scrolling down, we have some features here for the zoom range. That's with the lever here. So right now I have clear image zoom enabled, so it goes to that extra 2 times. I showed you that earlier. The little C comes up when you're zooming. But you can add even more zoom if you want by enabling digital zoom. However, the digital zoom, it definitely doesn't look as good, like it steps down in quality. Clear image zoom, it's pretty hard to tell. It is a digital zoom, but it's like hard to tell. It looks so good. Digital zoom, you can tell. But if you need more zoom, this is how you can get it. And it'll give you significantly more zoom. Let me turn it on here and I'll show you what I mean. Zoom in here. Yeah, so it's going all the way to 4.0 now. Clear image zoom went to 2.0 right here. And optical, of course, is going to stop right here. So that's 50 all the way. That's clear image zoom. Now that's digital zoom. So that's what it does. It'll give you a little extra, but it does cost in quality. I leave clear image zoom on because that looks really good. But again, to keep in mind, I already mentioned it, when you're in clear image zoom or digital zoom territory, the touch functions and stuff like stop working, like touch focus and things like that. So you do lose some power in those modes, just so you guys are aware. Now we got step zoom magnification. You can change that if you want. That's that feature. If we swipe over, we have this zoom button here. That's that. See the options here? So you can change those in the menu here. You can turn some of them off if you want, or you can enable the 4.0 one, for example. Now zoom lever speed. This is really cool because you can change the speed at which the camera zooms. So in standby mode, I have it set to 3. In record mode, so now if we change the record speed, let's just change it to fast real quick. Now watch this. This is how fast it's zooming in standby. Now if I hit record, see that? How fast it zooms now? So you can zoom really quick if you need to. And this is handy for certain situations where you might want to zoom really fast. And don't forget, we're in photo mode now, and it's still allowing me to record and stuff, which is very cool. I'm just going to put this back to 1, because I prefer it zooming slowly when recording video. Now continuing, we can set a custom key to the zoom speed. When using a remote control, you can control a zoom speed from the remote. Now grid line display, you can turn that on here, and that will give you like a rule of thirds by default, but there's a couple of different options. So you can see how it's just adding that grid to the screen, And this is very helpful if you need help framing. It helps get the horizon level. You could see like on the desk, like if it's crooked, the grids will really help with that. I usually have the rule of thirds grid on. I'm just going to turn it off now because I don't want anything distracting. Now, live view display, setting effect on. That I recommend leaving on, but you can turn that off. Sometimes when using full manual mode and flash and things like that, you do need to turn that off because by default, the camera is going to give you like a live preview of what you're seeing. But if you're using an external light source, that live preview is not going to be accurate because the flash is going to fire and the camera is going to expose for that light that's not currently visible because it didn't flash yet. So in those scenarios, you would want to turn the setting effect off. I pretty much never do that these days, but that's what that is. Now you got aspect marker. You can turn that on if you want, and that will just put more markers on the screen so you can see how it put those bars up there. So yeah, you can change this if you want to shoot like in a square format, like it'll give you an idea of what the square looks like. Even though it's going to record the full thing, it's just letting you know where the center is. So if you need to line it up or whatever for whatever project you're working on, that's what that does. Product showcase, we already talked about that. That basically disables the facial recognition and allows you to hold products up in front of the camera. It works great. Defocus level set. It's just manipulating the clear versus defocus option, which is the button on the top of the camera here. Now we got the ISO here. You can go in there and set that. You have your ISO range limit. You can go in there and change your limit. Maximum is 102,000. And now we have ISO auto minimum shutter speed is set to standard, and it's not going to work in shutter priority mode. This mode is specific for aperture priority mode. And why it's specific for aperture priority mode is because a lot of times you want to keep your aperture at a certain number, but you also want the shutter speed, you know, to be at a minimum. So, and where you would use this is in sports specifically is where I use it. So let me just change the camera mode and I'll show you how to set that. So I'm just going to put it in aperture priority mode. Go back in the menu here. So here we go. ISO auto minimum shutter speed. Right now it's set to standard. So check this out for a second. See how the shutter speed is at 1/30th of a second right here, guys? That's what the camera is choosing by default. And I'm using auto ISO. That's where this feature comes in if you're using auto ISO. Now let me go back in the menu. So remember 1/30th of a second because we're in like lower light. And ISO is 320 right now. ISO 320, when I focus, it'll tell you what the actual ISO is. So that's what we're at for this current lighting environment. Now watch this. We go in here, auto minimum shutter speed. Look at this, you have all these different options. Standard, fast, faster, slow. So watch this, let's put it on slower. Now look, 1/10 of a second. You see that? Now the ISO is lowered. Now the ISO is at 100. See that? So the auto ISO is now picking 100, which is giving me a slower shutter speed. So if I was in low light using a tripod, this would be a good option to get cleaner images with a lower ISO. Now, if we go into the menu here, let's change it to faster. So now I have it set to faster. Now look at the shutter speed, 1/125th of a second. And if I hold it down, the shutter speed, it's at ISO 1250. So it's going to require a higher ISO to get that faster shutter speed. But this will help freeze the action a little bit better. So guys, if you're taking photos and you're getting blurry shots all the time and you just don't know why, it's probably because your shutter speed is too slow. You can go in here and use this feature and it'll raise your shutter speed up. So I would recommend putting it at like fast first. Just try fast, and that should put you at like a minimum of 1/60th of a second. If it's, you know, if that's not good enough, then go to faster. And that will fix it. Like if you have shaky hands or whatever, things like that. That's what this feature is for. Now, what it's also for, so if you go up and down, left and right is going to change these, right? If you go up and down, look at this. You can actually hard set it. So let's say I'm doing sports and I want it at 1/1000th of a second, right there. Auto minimum shutter speed 1/1000th. Check. So now you can see my shutter speed is at 1/1000th of a second. My ISO is still set to auto. So now, if I press the shutter down, ISO 10,000. So that is going to freeze the action. So if I'm doing sports and stuff like that and I'm outside, that will freeze the action. Now I'm in a low light environment, but I just wanted to show you how the ISO is automatically changing because I'm using auto ISO, but it's working in combination with the shutter speed that I want. So again, auto minimum shutter. So this is awesome for sports when you want to keep the aperture at a specific number. Because remember, if you're using shutter priority mode, a more advanced feature, if you guys don't know yet, it's okay. I'll show you more in the lab in a minute to clear that up. But if you're using shutter priority mode and you set shutter priority to 1/1000th of a second, the aperture might not be where you want. Like if it's really bright out, it might stop the aperture down or something like that. This won't affect the aperture at all. You maintain full control of the aperture, and the auto ISO is taking care of the shutter speed for you. So it's almost like using shutter priority with aperture priority also, you know, but because it's auto ISO, it will adjust if the lighting changes. So it's one of my favorite features when it comes to using sports, or if I'm trying to get any kind of high-speed moving subject, and I also want to keep the aperture like low, like at f3.5 or something. I'm just going to put that back to standard. There we go. Now this is just exposure compensation, so that's the bottom button here that I talked about. Now you can actually go in here and you can manipulate your exposure. So if you turn it, you can see how it's getting darker. So that's 5 stops underexposed right now. And we can turn it. Now that is a 0, so that's like the correct exposure. But it was what the camera thinks anyway. And you can go all the way up to +5 overexposed. So that's what exposure compensation does. And that's basically what that slider was doing when we were sliding it to make the image brighter and dimmer before, but it just made it more beginner friendly. But the more advanced way to do it is by changing the exposure compensation. And you can change the steps. Metering mode. Now metering mode is something that we didn't go over yet. So what this is it basically will tell the camera how to expose the scene based on what it is seeing or metering. And by default, the metering mode is set to multi, which is basically using the whole screen, but it is prioritizing the center like a little bit more than the rest of the screen. So in this case, it's going to prioritize the face a little bit. Now, if we go into center weight average, you see how it got a lot brighter because it's prioritizing the center of the screen more. Now, if we go into standard spot metering, that will just be a very small spot that it's metering. So in this case, it's going to be similar to the face. But if I move to over here, it's going to be for the background. You can see how bright it just got. Now, if we go back, it's going to the face. So that's spot metering. And we can go down, and you can change the size of it. You got standard and large here. Now this one is the entire screen average, which is very similar to multi, but it's not prioritizing the center area. So, and then we have highlight metering mode. Highlight metering mode's awesome because it basically meters for whatever the brightest thing in the scene is. So right now it's pretty much this spot on the head here. It's exposing for that. So it's great for like frothy white water, like waterfall type stuff, wedding dresses, anything that's like super bright. Like if you're shooting light bulbs and you want to get the actual filaments and not, you know what I mean? Like the light bulb's like really bright. But if you put highlight tone priority on, it'll like expose for the light bulb correctly, and you'll be able to actually see all the filaments inside the light bulb and stuff, which is very cool. Now you could also use exposure comp to like lower the exposure to make that happen as well. But this is just another tool that the camera has built in specifically for that. But by default, it's set to multi, so I would leave it there for the most part. Now, face priority in multimetering, that is on. You can turn it off. So what that means is if it sees a face, it is going to prioritize that and expose for the face as a priority. You can turn it off here if that's messing you up. Spot metering, by default, the spot meter is just the very center, like what we were just showing you before in the metering area. The spot meter is the center, but you can move it around. You can change it to the focus point if you want, so it'll spot meter based off of the focus point, which is a really cool feature. Auto exposure lock with shutter is set to auto. What that means is if you press the shutter button right now, see how it's like locked at the moment? That will lock auto exposure. Sometimes if you lock like this and then recompose your image, the exposure will adjust. And that's what that feature is for. It'll stop that from happening. So watch what happens when I turn this on. All right, so see right now I got it locked on the face. Now if I turn this way, you can see the scene is brighter, but the exposure didn't change. Now watch when I let go of the shutter button. You see how it got a little bit darker? That's because it just adjusted the exposure. So that's what that feature does. when you have it turned on. So I just leave it in auto for the most part, but you might want to have that off if you don't want your exposure to shift when you focus and recompose. Now, flash mode, we're not using a flash, but this is where you would go to change it. And then, of course, you have flash compensation, so you can make the flash brighter or darker depending on your situation. Wireless flash you can enable, red eye reduction you can enable, external flash set, you can go in there for that type of stuff. White balance, it's set to auto. Priority set in white balance. So you can go in here and you can change the priority to ambient or white. It's up to you. You can just try that. If your skin tones are looking off, you can mess around with these white balance settings to see if one looks better than the other. Shutter auto white balance lock. That's very similar to the auto exposure lock. When you have the shutter pressed halfway, the white balance will not change right now. It's like locked. That's what that is. Well, it's set to off, but if it was on, it would lock. White balance capture frame size is basically how much of the frame or the image screen it's going to use to calculate white balance. So I would set that to large. That's where it is by default. Dynamic range optimizer, that's set to on, but you can change the level. What that does is it helps fill in the shadows. You could see if you have it set to level 1, it'll bring up the shadow detail. See that? That's dynamic range optimizer. I'm just leaving it on auto. Creative look, these are the different creative looks you have. So the creative looks you can actually scroll through, and this one's like neutral. If you go over to the right, you can now change all these individual settings. You see how powerful this is? You can adjust all these different settings and then apply them by hitting OK. And then now that creative look is saved with those adjustments, and you can manipulate all of them. So that's pretty cool and powerful if you want to do that. Picture profile. This is where you can go to set different picture profiles. This is where we used to go to do log shooting, but now the log shooting is added to the main menu area. So I don't use picture profile anymore myself, because again, you go to the main settings to enable log now. Soft skin effect. This is where you can turn that on and off if you want. Zebra display. Zebra will help you configure your exposure. It's very helpful when shooting in log modes because you can set the zebra level to a specific brightness for your gray card. I have a video on that if you guys want to watch it, on how to use S-Log3 using the Sony a6700, which is the exact same sensor as this camera. So the procedure is basically the same. It's just a slightly different camera body. But anyways, how I did that was I used the zebra levels. So I went in there, I configured the zebra up for how I needed it, and then you hold the gray card up, and that's how you can get your exposure perfect and also perfect white balance when using log mode. And that's what I like zebra for. So I'm just going to leave it off for now. Now we have a whole ton of focus options in here. Balanced emphasis. I usually just leave everything on balanced emphasis, but you can change it to release or AF. And what that means is when you release the shutter button, like it'll make sure that the focus is at that, or when you actually press it, that's the AF point. So I could hold it. Now the subject might have moved, so it's going to readjust when you release. So anyways, balanced emphasis is good for those. Autofocus level for crossing. So what this means is if you're focusing on something and then somebody steps in front of you, like somebody crosses the autofocus plane, will the camera pick up them or not? Like, is it going to keep the person behind them in focus? That's what this is. So you can dial it in. Lock on means it won't change. If someone walks in front, it's not going to change, right? It's locked on, or it's going to be less likely to change. So standard is where it's at by default. AF track for speed change, very similar situation. If somebody's going by on a bicycle and they start going faster, it'll just adjust the speed of the tracking. So that's what that stands for. So the aperture drive in AF, you can set it to standard or silent priority or focus priority. So focused, the aperture mechanism will make like the most noise. Silent, it'll make the least noise. Standard is pretty good. So it's not really an issue, but if you're in silent situations, that's where you might want to mess with that. Preset focus and zoom is a new feature. So I don't really know exactly what it is. Displays a list of information registered in preset focus zoom. Enables you to check details of registered content. You can also make settings to recall only the zoom positions. So I guess you could just save the details of the focus and the zoom and then recall it. So yeah, you could then set a custom key to recall those settings if you want to do that. So this could be useful in some scenarios for sure. I'll have to play with that when I get a chance. Autofocus with shutter, I have that turned on. Pre-AF, I also have turned on. If you turn pre-AF off, it'll probably save you a little bit of battery life. And what that is like I said, if I focus on the background here, see how the focus is now on that pole back there? If I cancel tracking, see how the focus automatically went back to the face? That's what pre-AF is. So if I have that turned off, it shouldn't do that. So let me focus on the background, like so, and if I cancel it, it should not focus on the face now, and it's not, see? So that's what pre-AF does. It's very useful, and it's handy. I usually leave it on. But sometimes, like, you know, you might not want it on. You might not want it automatically thinking of what it needs to focus on, you know? It's like pre-focusing. So, like I said, I leave that on. So focus area, we already went over that, but there's all the different focus areas in here. And that just basically limits where the camera can focus. And then we got all these other options here for focus area limits. So you can add all these other areas. You see how there's only a few of them checked? So you can add more, like these flexible spot features and stuff. And you can make custom ones as well. And there's a lot of options. Just gonna click OK. All right, so this is basically switch vertical, horizontal area. So if you have the camera in vertical mode, like will the focus points switch or will they stay? That's what this feature is. Focus area color, you can change that now to red. I kind of like it on red. Autofocus area registration, this is a really cool feature. So if I'm behind the batter and like Layla's pitching, right? I can register Layla as an autofocus area. Then I can set the focus to be on the batter, right? And what you can do is you can have a special key programmed for the autofocus recall. So if I'm focusing like on the batter, I can just hit that button and it'll switch to Layla instantly. Like I won't have to move the focus. I won't have to touch the screen. All I have to do is hit a button, boom, it goes right back to Layla. And then if I just hit the focus again, it'll focus back to the batter because that's where I actually have my focus area set to, is on the batter. So that's what you could use the AF area registration for. Another super powerful feature, and you can delete it there. You can make it auto clear if you want. So this is just whether or not you'll see the autofocus point when you're in AFC mode. I definitely want that on. Phase detection area, I leave that off. That'll just show like all the phase detection dots on the screen. So it makes the screen a little more cluttered looking. All right, so the autofocus frame move amount, that's all that means is when you're using one of the smaller focus modes and you use like the direction pad to change it. It's like how much will it move when you do that. That's what that is. Subject recognition, again, you can turn that on and off if you don't want it to prioritize faces, pets, and birds. Like that's what this is. It's going to prioritize those things depending on what target you have set. You could turn it off though if you don't want it to do that. Here you can go in and you can decide which ones you actually want. If you never shoot birds, for example, you could uncheck that if you don't want it to come up as one of the options. You can change the right eye, left eye default if you want. Subject recognition frame display, I actually like this on. This will actually put the box around the subject. See that square? So it's easier to see it. You know it's tracking. Like you could see the eye box as well, but that's really small. So I do prefer to have the frame on because I just like knowing that it's definitely seeing the subject. This is a good visual indication that that's happening. Face memory, again, guys, this is where you can go and you can program faces. And that was that biometric warning that we got when we first turned the camera on as well. So what you can do with this is you could take a photo of your kid and it'll prioritize your kid against all the other kids. Like if they're like on the field, it'll see your kid's face and it'll be like, yeah, focus on that guy. That's what that does. And it's incredible. So if you want to prioritize certain faces, this is where you would go to do that. This is great for weddings and stuff. If the bride's on the dance floor and she's with a couple of people, but you want her face prioritized, register her face. That's how this works. Auto magnifier, basically when you're in manual focus and you turn the focus ring, it will automatically zoom in and magnify and help you focus. Now, this actually works as the zoom when in autofocus mode. I forgot to mention that. Or you could use this toggle here, guys. Now, peaking is another feature. It's great for video. It's great for manual focusing. What it'll do is it'll put like a guide up, these like colors. I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so now that I'm in manual focus, you could see it. So you see the white You can kind of see it on the eyes there. Here, let me change it to a different color and we'll put it on high. All right, so now you can see it on the subject there. You see the red. So when I zoom in there, you can see it like when it gets to the eye, there's just that little bit of red, see on the eyes? So now I know in manual focus, it's accurate on the eyes. So this is what focus peaking's for. It's really meant for manual focus situations, video. If you're trying to focus while recording video, you know, having peaking on can be very helpful, for example. So that's what that feature is for. I don't use it that often, but every once in a while. So playback filter condition. This is an interesting feature that's new to me. If you go in here, you can actually prioritize what is shown when you hit the playback button. So that's interesting. So you can get it to show shot marks, for example, which I already talked about is how you can take photos in video. Smartphone, transfer state, protected shots, and so forth. So that's an interesting feature. If you have thousands of images on there, that could be very handy. Image order by date is fine. So this is where you can go and you can protect images. So you can protect multiple, all with this date, different options there. This is where you can go and you can rate your images. So you can go in here and rate them. Rating custom key, so you can assign a key to rate them, and then you can just hit that key when you're going through the photos. You can delete stuff here. You can enable this option here where if you hit the garbage can twice, it'll auto-delete. So you don't have to, you know, deal with the confirmation or hitting delete, then hitting yes, and so forth. Now you can go in here and you can crop your images. You can rotate your images. So this is a little bit of post-processing. Photo capture is if you actually have a video selected, you can go into the video footage and extract a photo. That's what photo capture is. So create still image, that will basically auto-generate the images from the shot markers. If you have the shot marker option and you're using it, this will auto-create those images from the video file that has those markers on it. So you have to select the video file first in the playback menu, then go here and then select this. This is just more shot marker stuff. It's going to maintain it even after you do the images, like it'll leave the shot marks there is what that means. And this is the JPEG. You can actually convert your JPEGs into HEIF files if you want to. It's pretty interesting. Now this, if you're trying to watch your time lapse, if you're using interval shooting and doing like the real deal photo version of time lapse, you can go in here and change your playback speed. So this way, when you do take a time lapse in interval shooting, it by default puts it in a folder. So you can click on the first photo in that like series, and then you can play it from here and it'll play back the time lapse and it'll look like a movie. So you can see what the time lapse looks like as a movie on your camera. So this way you know your settings are right. Like if you have to check it, and you can go in here and you can change the settings based on how you had it set. Like if you did a photo every like couple of seconds or whatever, this is where you would go and you can change the speed to make sure it plays back correctly. Now you have slideshow options. So if you have this hooked up with the HDMI cable to a TV and you're showing your family, you can do a slideshow. It's nice. Now this is just more stuff on how the playback area is like configured. So, you know, image index, it's like how many squares are you going to see at once and stuff like that. Display as group, again, if you take rapid fire shots and continuous shooting, it'll put those into a group. Interval shooting, it'll put them in a group. That's what this means. Display rotation, that'll automatically rotate if you take a vertical shot. If you're looking at it in the playback menu, it'll auto rotate. Focus frame display is pretty cool. If you turn that on, when you go into the playback menu. All right, so on this image, you could see it a little better. You see the green dot? That is the focus frame. So it's showing you where the focus was on the photo frame. So you could see here, this was actually a bracketed shot. If I turn that off, you won't see it in the playback menu. See, it's gone now. I like that though, because it's good to know if you nailed the focus, especially on humans, you could see that it's on the eye. Aspect ratio marker, that'll just show the aspect ratio and it's on by default. So this is basically a way to search for images based on a specific time if you want to do that. So it'll help you find images if you have like thousands of them on the memory card over the course of a long period of time. Still image jump, that's just meaning if you turn the dial, it's going to jump through like a bunch of images. You can change it either from this dial or you can use the rear control wheel. Image jump method, again, 1 by 1, this is where you can change it. Jump by 10, for example. So if you use the wheel, it'll go through 10 at a time. And right by default, it's 1 by 1. So now we're in the network area. This is where you would go to connect the smart device, you know, smartphone and stuff like that. Remote shooting, so if you want to use the phone to control the camera, you can basically connect to the camera with your smart device, and then you can select the images, and then you can drag them over to the tablet. This will just reset whether the image was transferred or not. It has like an indication letting you know that you already transferred it, so you don't transfer them over and over. So control while power off, this will basically just keep like a Bluetooth keep alive signal on there. So if you try to connect to your camera when it's off, it will still work. You'll still be able to see the photos and stuff. That's what this feature does. I just leave it off by default, but depending on how much you use. I really don't use smart devices to control the photos and stuff. I usually just import the images to my computer. But a lot of people these days are just using their phones and stuff. So these features are going to be more important to people like you that are doing that. All right, guys, so network streaming is going to work over Wi-Fi. It's recommended that you use like a really fast connection, like 5G, you know, so if you have your cell phone like right next to you, you can hook it up to your cell phone and then you can network live stream, which is amazing. So here's some options for streaming. You got output quality, all sorts of stuff like that. USB streaming. So now this is like when you plug into the USB port, it'll turn the camera into a USB camera. And you have different output resolutions. You can do all the way up to 4K 30. And you can also record the stream to the memory card if you want. By default, that's disabled though, but you can record if you want. It will also power the camera, guys, when you have the USB-C plugged in, so it'll power and act as a webcam at the same time. Cloud connection, this is where you can connect the camera to, you know, the cloud if you want, so it'll auto upload photos and things like that. I don't really use the cloud services, but if you do, you can go in here and set that stuff up. It's great security if you want to keep your files, you know, saved somewhere. Now Wi-Fi, here's all your different Wi-Fi options here. You can turn it on, things like that, connect. You can change the name and stuff if you want. Bluetooth functions, this is where you would go and turn Bluetooth on. So if you need to connect a gimbal or a remote or something like that, you would need to enable the Bluetooth right here. I'm actually going to turn it on. And then you can do pairing, and that will connect it with like Bluetooth shutter, for example, on more modern gimbals, have that set up. Then you can go in here and manage paired devices. You also need the Bluetooth to be on when you connect to your smart device. So Bluetooth remote control, it just depends on what remotes you have. I'm going to leave that off for now. IP address settings, this is where you can go and set that type of stuff, more advanced LAN type information, display wired LAN info, so forth. USB LAN connection, that's pretty cool, tethered connection. Now lastly, down here in the network area, we got airplane mode. If you want to shut the camera down and make sure it's not communicating in any way, put it in airplane mode. And then you can edit the device name. We got root certificates, access authentication settings. You need that when you're trying to pair to certain devices and stuff like that. Here's your language, area, date, and time. Now here is where you can change your frame rates from NTSC to PAL if you want to. I always get this question because people wonder why my frame rates look different. So my frame rates are 24, 30, 60, and 120. If you're shooting in PAL, it's going to be 25, 50 frames per second and 100 frames per second. So it's like a little bit different. So if your camera is displaying those frame rates, that's because you live in a region that is a PAL region. Like Europe, for example, is PAL. The United States is NTSC, and that's what this feature is. So resetting settings, this is where you can go to reset the camera, which is what I did right before I started this video. I had to reset it and, you know, blank everything out. Save load settings. Now this is where you can save your settings to your memory card, and then you can take the memory card, put it in another camera, and upload the settings. So if you have multiple cameras and you want them all set exactly the same, you can go in and save your camera configs, like get it all set up how you want it, save it here to your memory card, then you can upload it to another camera and you won't even have to set that camera up. It'll just automatically be set up. So that's very nice that they offer the save load option nowadays. Now here is the customization area, which is extremely powerful on the modern Sony cameras, including this one. So if you go in here, you have different custom settings for each mode. Now that means video mode, playback mode, and photo mode. So if we go in here, it's giving you this warning option here. So I'm just going to check that. I don't really need to be warned. So now in here, you can see all the different buttons on the camera and what they are currently set to for a given mode. So right now, if you look on the rear of the camera, we have these buttons on the back dial or what's coming up. And you can see how it has a picture of a video camera next to it. So what that means is it's set that way for photo and video. And you can go over here and change it. If you select that, follow custom. So that's product showcase, center button, drive mode. This is the ISO button, and so forth. But anyways, if you go over here and you go down, here's a couple more custom buttons. You got up here, the record button, and then you have some lenses have function buttons on them right there, so you can control them. Then you have the dials. So you have the rear dial and you have this top dial, which you can configure. And again, these are independent depending on what mode you're in. So you can go in here to video mode again and set all these up if you want for video. And then for playback, again, you can set the custom buttons. This is where you would set the ratings and stuff like that. You would use a custom button for rating images in playback mode, but that you wouldn't need those in video or photo mode. You know what I'm saying? So, and then you got function menu settings. So you have function menu settings for photo, and then you have function menu settings for playback. So if we go in here, on the top, we have function menu settings for photo and then video. And you can see how they're very similar, but a little bit different. Like, for example, on the video mode, we have the microphone here, but in photo mode, we have the silent option instead. So that's what it is. And you can go in here and completely change this stuff. Right now, it's set to creative look. You can change that to picture profile. Now it's set to picture profile, see? I'm going to put it back to creative look. Now it's set to creative look. It's that simple. So you can scroll through here and change any of this stuff as you see fit. How it is out of the box is pretty good, to be honest. It's set up pretty good. After I use the camera for a while, I do tend to change things. It just depends on how many buttons the camera has and stuff. So right now I've just been loading up the My Menu area. Now, different set for still and movie. So this is an important setting, guys. So we're just going to click OK. When we switch from photo to movie, the settings stay the same, meaning aperture, shutter speed, ISO, exposure comp, metering, and so forth. If you want to have them completely independent from one another, so if you go from photo mode to video mode, the settings are going to be completely different. They're not going to like follow one another. That's where you would go and enable this stuff. So I like to do that. And focus mode, white balance. I'm going to leave it like that. So now in photo mode, like let's say I have the aperture at like f8, right? And let me switch to photo mode or video mode now. See, the aperture is at f4. It didn't follow over. What it would have done previously, this would be at f8 right now. So that's what that does. Now display screen set. These are the different display screens. So you can see, you know, when you cycle through hitting the display button. Record with shutter. You can actually have it record with the shutter button if you guys want. I actually prefer to have the shutter focus for me in video mode, but you don't have to. You could use the button on the back, the center button, if you want to do a standard focus. It'll also do it that way, but I prefer the shutter button to focus even when recording video. Now, you can also change the shutter button to add shot markers. So when you're recording video, again, if you don't want to use the button for focusing like I do, you can set it to the marker button. So if you, while recording video, you can just press the shutter button while you're recording, and that will add the shot markers, like as if you're taking photos during video. So I don't have that enabled, but that's where that is. Now, zoom ring rotate, you can change it which way it zooms, depending on which way you rotate if you want. Custom key set, this is where you can go and you can set your custom keys, do a little more customizing in there. Custom dial set, this is where you can go and you can customize your dials a little more if you want. My dial settings, this is where you can go and you can change what the dials do. Again, just tremendous power. Aperture and shutter speed rotation, normal, that's fine. Dial wheel, unlock. You can lock the wheels if you want, the dial and the wheel, so they don't do anything. That's what that feature does. All right, so just finishing up here with the menu, we have touch operate. My memory card's just filled up, by the way. So that's crazy, over 2 hours. Touch operation, you can turn that on or off. This is where you can do that. Now, shooting screen. What that means is if you go in here, All those buttons and stuff that are on the screen in regards to touching while using the camera, that's what all this stuff is. Like the swipe left, swipe up for function. You can turn all that off, some of it on, some of it off, whatever. That's where all that stuff is. If we go back, playback screen, turn that on, menu screen, on. So again, this is all relating to touch. So if you want to use the touch screen in playback mode, like again, in playback mode, you can use the touch. You can swipe to go to the next photo. I didn't show you that earlier. You can pinch in and out to see more date and time type stuff. So you can change the size, you know, double tap and so forth. Also, when you're in manual focus, you can double tap and it'll zoom in like that. But these are the features that it's talking about when in playback. Remember I told you could zoom in playback, you could zoom with the lever like that, but you can also just double tap and they can drag if you want. Same thing with the menu screen, like I could touch right now in the menu if I want. You could turn that off if you don't want to do that. Screen reader, this was what was prompted when the camera first turned on for the visually impaired people. Go in here and enable screen reading, change the volume, the speed, and stuff like that. So very cool and helpful for people that need that. Enlarge screen, this is another option for people that like aren't necessarily blind, but like it would just be easier to see if it was larger. You can go in here and enable this. And what it does is you could set it to a custom button and it'll just enlarge the screen for you. So it's just going to be easier to see the screen if you need it. Now, monitor brightness. This is a feature I recommend changing. You can go in here. As a matter of fact, I'm going to hit the garbage can and I'm going to add this to my menu. Put it right there is good. So now that's in my menu there. So what I like to do is, especially when I'm outside, I like to select this option here, sunny weather. And now it's much brighter. So if you go back to manual mode, you can go left and right and make it brighter and dimmer. You might want it dimmer if you're in a really dark environment and you want the screen to be less bright because it's like, you know, lighting you up, you know, so you can make it dimmer here or brighter. But again, if you go up to the top here, sunny weather just sets it like to maximum brightness, and it's much easier to see the screen outside in this mode. I'm just going to put it back to manual for now though, because I'm recording in here and I don't want the screen to be too bright for that. Now display quality, I recommend setting that to high. It's just going to make the screen look a little bit better in certain scenarios. Monitor flip direction, this you can enable or set to auto. See that here? You can flip it 180. Lots of options there. So people who are asking, you know, the monitor, it's not mirrored or whatever, this is where you can go to do that. You can set it to mirror mode and it'll flip and be in a mirror situation for you, for those selfie users out there that need that. Vertical display, I'm just going to leave that on. Now we have time code user bit data. This is just more advanced stuff. If you're syncing cameras together in a big operation, you're going to want to enable time coding. So all the footage is synced up for the, you know, processing engineers that are doing that work. Time coding. Gamma display assist. This is a feature if you're shooting log, you can have enabled. And by default, it was already set up when you enabled log. It put the Rec 709. Gamma display assist LUT in there, so it already kind of did that. I'm going to turn this on though. Gamma display type auto. Now auto review. Auto review is when you take a photo, it'll come up on the screen in the back for a second before you can take another photo. That's the auto review. You might have a camera in the past that did that and you might want that. That's where you would go to change that, or enable it, I should say. Shoot mode select screen, you could make it so that doesn't display if you want. So when you're going into the shoot modes, remember how it showed like a picture of like a sports and all that? That's what that's referring to. Now auto monitor off, I don't set that. I just use the power save time, and by default it's set to a minute. So you probably saw this during this video a couple of times. The camera just shuts off after a minute, like the lens will close. So that's because it's set to 1 minute. Normally in the real world, I have this set to 2 minutes on most of my cameras because I just don't want it to shut off if I'm like busy for a second, like a phone call or whatever, you know, you're just looking at something, setting up a prop. I don't want the thing to shut off. So 2 minutes is better. And I just have them linked, so it'll just shut off in 2 minutes. Auto power off temp, we already set that when we turned the camera on, but this is where it is in the menu. It's set to high. Playback volume, you can change that. You got 4-channel monitoring in here. You can actually change that stuff if you want. Audio signals, that's when it beeps when you focus. You could turn that off here. When it starts recording and stops recording, it makes noise. You can turn that off here. Audio signal volume, you could change that as well, which is quite nice. You could lower the volume and just leave it all enabled. USB connection mode, select when connected. That's fine. When you plug a USB cable, it's going to ask you what mode you want it to be in, but you can hard set it if you want. It's up to you. I don't like doing that anymore because sometimes you might want to use it as a webcam or you might want to take the photos off of it. So I prefer being prompted when I actually plug a USB cable in. So this is just if you're connecting to a computer with USB power on, that's on by default. And like I was telling you earlier, the camera will power via the USB. So you definitely want to have that on, in my opinion. Here's your HDMI settings, guys. If you're using the HDMI out, you might have issues with certain monitors. If you're going to recorders, for example, you might have to change some settings in here. HDMI display. If you are sending this to a monitor and you don't want the camera information to show up, like the aperture and all that stuff, that you would want to turn this off. That's what HDMI info display is. It'll look like the back of the camera, like with all these buttons and stuff. Like you'll see all this stuff on the screen if you have that set to on like that on the monitor. So normally, like on my A7 IV, I have that turned off, for example, you know. Same thing with the A6400, I have it turned off, so I just have a clean picture in front of me on my monitors. Control from HDMI. Some advanced devices, you'll be able to use the control link over the HDMI cable. That's on by default. Video light mode, power link, again, more advanced stuff. Record lamp, that refers to this lamp here lighting up. So you can turn that off if you want, if you don't want it to light up, because people will know you're recording them. If they see that red light, they're going to be like, you're recording me. So you can turn it off, and then they won't know. Pixel mapping, it does that when the camera first turned on. It recalibrates the sensor pretty much, so you can do that every once in a while. The camera, it seems to prompt every once in a while nowadays. Version, this will tell you what firmware the camera is at. So mine's currently at version 1.0, and the lens is at 0.01. You got serial number, privacy notice, and that's it, guys. That is the end of the menu. So there you have it. That is the basics of how this camera works. Let me set up here in the lab scene, and I'm going to go through a couple of different modes to show you how the camera works in like various modes, like using the lab scene for those interested. So this will be more like a real world use case scenario over there. So let's go do that. All right, guys, so here we are. I have the camera set to aperture priority mode now. And what that's going to allow us to do, it'll actually say here, you know, you could make the background blurry, basically. It gives you the control of depth of field and stuff like that. So looking at the quarter here, I'm zoomed in at 50 millimeter, and you can see the lights in the background, how they look like those cool bokeh balls, right? Now watch when I change the aperture. This is the maximum aperture for this lens at this focal distance. So I'm at 50 millimeter. This is a variable aperture lens. So at 50 millimeter, it's at f5.6. That's as fast as this lens can go. Some lenses will go down all the way to like f1.2, for example. So this lens, though, that's where we're at. So watch what happens, though, when I raise the aperture. So now I'm stopping it down, is what this is called. So now I'm at f8. See how the bokeh balls are getting smaller? See that? That is the depth of field changing. And what the depth of field is basically the distance of acceptable sharpness. So right now I'm focused on the quarter right here. So the sharpness is probably like a few feet, you know, like a foot in front and a foot behind the quarter. That is like the depth of field. And the shallower it is, the more blurry the background's going to be based on your subject and where your focus is relative to your subject in the distance. So right now those lights are about 15 feet behind where this quarter is. And you can see it at f5.6. They look pretty darn cool. And if we needed them to be, if we needed more detail back there, like if I wanted the background sharp too, I would have to stop it down to like f whatever, 25 or something like that. Don't really want to go too high because then you end up getting diffraction and it'll get a little bit soft. But you can see how the background is a lot more detail in it now at f36. And then when we go back to 5.6, it looks like that. And then we can reacquire the focus on the quarter. And there you have it. So that's how aperture priority mode works. And you can change it right here by touching if you want, but I just prefer using the dial. And you can make your ISO hard set if you want, or set it to auto. And then don't forget, in aperture priority mode, you can also use the auto minimum shutter speed feature that I was showing you earlier to have a faster shutter speed if you're doing sports or something like that. All right, guys, so just while we're still on aperture priority mode, I changed the lens to my Zeiss 55mm f1.8 lens. Now, it's still at f5.6. Watch what happens when I open up the aperture more. Check out the number there. 4, 3, look at those Pokeballs back there. See that? So at f1.8, that's the kind of look you can get. I'm going to stop it down. Right there is 5.6. So let me go into the menu here and switch it to shutter priority mode. That's the S. Now you can see the 1/100 there. You'll see now the control wheel is controlling the shutter speed. So that's how that works. All right, so now I got the spinny thing in there. All right, so notice my shutter speed. It's at let's put it at 1/500th of a second. And I'm going to focus on the fan over there. I'll just track over there somewhere. All right, now watch this. At 1/500th of a second, it froze it. Now watch what happens when I slow the shutter speed down. Let's put it at like 1/10th of a second. Now watch this. See that? So it's capturing the blur. So 1/10th of a second, that thing was spinning around a bunch of times. So that's how you get motion blur. That's how you get blurry water. That's how you get the streaky taillights with cars. All sorts of stuff like that. That's motion blur. So shutter speed is what controls that. So the slower the shutter speed, the longer that shutter is open and the more motion that will be captured. Now let me show you manual mode. Manual mode allows you to control both the shutter speed and the aperture independently. So you can see when I turn this dial, it's the shutter speed. This dial is the aperture. And also notice the exposure. So because I'm in auto ISO, that's going to kind of help maintain the exposure. So I'm just going to hard set the ISO to 100 so you guys can see what that looks like. So now I have the ISO hard set. So the exposure is now going to change based on what I do with these dials. If I slow the shutter speed down, it's going to allow more time for light to get in. And you can see that's going to make the scene brighter and brighter and brighter the slower I go. So I don't need it that slow. Right around there looks pretty good. And you can see the meter here now says 0 at the bottom. And this is normally the exposure compensation, but when in manual mode, it's actually a meter. So this will tell you where it's at. So watch when I open up the aperture a little bit. See, now it's at plus 0.3. Now watch when I stop it down. See how it's getting darker? And now it's telling me it's -2 exposure. I just touched the screen by accident. See the touch tracking? I'm just going to cancel that by hitting the center button, and that'll cancel the tracking. But anyways, F10, F11, F14, and so forth. If I put it at F8 at ISO 100, it's too dark, right? It's underexposed. Now watch what happens when I slow the shutter speed down. You see how the exposure is coming back? So right there, 0.4 of a second will get me a proper exposure at F8 using ISO 100. So again, in low light situations, that's no good if I need a faster shutter speed. So right now I need a really slow shutter speed. I'm going to need to use a tripod and a self-timer to get a good shot, you know, with these current settings. If I was in a restaurant and it was very low light and this is what I wanted, I would have to raise the ISO way up because the shutter speed is way too slow. So watch what happens if we change the ISO back to auto. All right, so now we're back in auto ISO. And the shutter speed is at still the same shutter speed. So what we need to do now is raise the shutter speed to what we would actually need in this environment. So we're going to need like 1/60th of a second, let's say, if there's like people walking around. So somewhere right around there should be a good exposure as far as shutter speed, right? Because we need to freeze the action a little bit because we're in low light in a restaurant or something, let's say. So now if I press the shutter halfway down, you'll see what the ISO needs to be. ISO 2500 is what is required in this setup because I'm in full manual mode, remember. So when you press this down, it'll pick the ISO for you. Now let's open up the aperture a little bit and we'll do the shutter again. Look, now it's only at ISO 500. That's because the aperture is much more open. And remember, the aperture is like an eye. It's like a pupil of an eye. So now the aperture is wide open. So it's going to require less time for the light to come in, and it's also going to require less sensor sensitivity, because that's what ISO is sensor sensitivity. So you want that ideally as low as possible, the ISO. So let's say we needed a faster shutter speed, you know, something like 1/400th of a second. We're doing indoor sports like volleyball, something that's not too fast, but pretty fast, 1/500th of a second. And we have the aperture as wide open as we can. So we're going to have to be running at ISO 4000 to get shots at 1/500th of a shutter speed in this lighting environment. So you can see how the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed work together. Let's raise the aperture a little bit. Let's say we need f5.6 for the aperture, because I'm zoomed all the way to 50, right? So that's going to put the lens at 5.6. So now the ISO, if we click, is going to need to be at 8,000. So if you're in a gymnasium, you want 1/500th of a second, and you want f5.6, because this lens is at f5.6 at 50 millimeter, you're going to be at ISO 8,000 to get those shots. And that's how it works. That's how manual mode works. Very powerful. And, you know, that's why it takes more knowledge to use manual mode, because these three components work together. ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. It's all part of the exposure triangle, and they all work together to get a proper exposure. So they're tools. So if we switch to video mode here, just wanted to show you, if I hit record, how when touching around the screen, I know I showed you this already, but so it's going to switch to the background there, and it's switching to the foreground like so. So you notice how the transition speed, it's pretty quick right now. So let me stop recording, go into the menu, go into autofocus, manual focus, and right here we have autofocus transition speed, and notice it's set to fast. That's how it comes out of the box. So let me set it to slow. And responsiveness here, I'm going to lower that as well to 3. All right, so now let me hit record. Now watch, I'm going to switch to the background, and you can see it's going nice and slowly. And the tracking box doesn't come up until it actually locks on, so it doesn't look like it's working, and then all of a sudden you'll see it pop up. Watch. I just focused on the coins, and there's the tracking box. Like once it locks, the tracking box locks. But you see how that nice smooth transition? That's that slower transition speed, which is really nice, and that's how you would set that. If we go into photo mode really quick, I just want to show you how to enable the bracketing if you want to do HDR shooting. So go down here to bracket, and we're going to go over. I like to use this one here, 2 EVs, 3 photos. Oop, that's 5 photos. This one right here, 3 photos, like so. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to switch this back to aperture priority mode, which is what I normally use in the real world most of the time. All right, so f5.6, 1/60th of a second. So it took the 3 shots. Now, what I forgot to do was change the ISO. I have it set to auto. I don't want the ISO on auto. I want it on fixed 100, because I'm using a self-timer and a tripod. So no reason to not use ISO 100. Unless there's stuff moving in the background, but usually it's landscape type stuff. So now it'll take the 3 exposures, and it'll be at a lower ISO, so the shutter speed doesn't need to be at 1/500th of a second. So there's the 1 exposure. You can see it's really bright. That's the underexposed shot, and that's the normal exposure. So we're going to get all the details in the highlights, shadows, and so forth. That's what bracketing is for HDR in particular. All right, it's going to put it back in video mode here, and we're in full auto. So let me swipe over to get some of the options here. All right, so I'm just going to turn CineVlog on by hitting that CineVlog button there. Whoops, I hit the tracking by accident. All right, so CineVlog's on. I have it set to Chick Gold, and I have the AF speed set to medium. Let's put that on low. There we go. So now I have the AF speed on low, and we are using CineVlog. So let me hit record, and there we have it. And zoom in and out. You can change the way the CineVlog looks by changing these modes here. So we can change it from Chick to Fresh, which is really colorful, or black and white, for example. Go back to S Cinetone there. We can change the gold, ocean, forest, back to auto, and that's how that works. All right, guys, whew, that was a long beginner's guide, let me tell you. But there's so much information on these cameras now. They're so powerful that it takes a really long time to go through it and like effectively explain everything. So I really hope you got what you were looking for in this video. If you guys have questions below in the comments area, you know, you might have missed something, ask questions below if you have them. Be happy to try and help out. All right, guys, so in addition, below in the description area, I will have accessories that I recommend for the ZV-E10. So if you need stuff like camera straps, memory cards, tripods, lenses, things like that on board, you know, audio, gimbals, stuff like that. I'm gonna have the videos that will teach you how to use that stuff, and I'll also list like the accessories that I personally use and recommend if you're interested. You could also ask if you're not sure, you know, hey Jay, what should I get? You know, whatever, it's all good. All right, guys, like I said, appreciate it. If you got something out of this video, please give me a thumbs up, and it would be really cool if you hit that subscribe button as well. And if you made it through this whole video, bravo, because that's a lot of watching and it's a lot of information to consume. So I'm proud of you, good job. And you are definitely on the way to mastering your Sony ZV-E10 Mark II. All right, guys, I'll catch up with you next time. Take care.